Hello, traveler. Tonight, we begin with a question that hums like an ancient echo across desert winds. What if the pyramids were built before the Ice Age? Not in the time of pharaohs and golden headdresses, but long before hieroglyphs ever carved their way onto stone. Long before the Nile flowed as it does today. Long before history dared to call itself history. Have you ever wondered if the monuments of Giza, those immovable giants, might be far older than we've been told? Older than Egypt, older than writing, perhaps even older than memory itself? Let's drift for a moment into that possibility. Close your eyes. Imagine standing on the Giza plateau, not beneath a burning sun, but under the silver-blue glow of an Ice Age sky. The air is cooler, drier, tinged with distant storms. The Nile is wide and wild, splitting a savanna where lions roam and thick grass leans into the breeze. The pyramids rise not from dust, but from green. And beside them, the Sphinx, her face still uncarved, watches not over Cairo, but over a forgotten forest. Her paws rest on soft, rain-slick stone. In this version of the world, you hear no carts, no call to prayer, only wind, bird song, and the pulse of something lost. Could such a vision be real? Some scientists think it might be. Geologists have studied the deep vertical scars along the Sphinx enclosure, carved not by sand and time, but by heavy rain. Rain that hasn't touched this desert for over 7,000 years. Engineers have puzzled over granite blocks weighing 80 tons, carved with such precision they seem machined. And above it all, the stars, Orion's belt, align with the pyramids not in 2500 BCE, but in the sky of 10,500 BCE. There are theories. There are arguments. There is resistance. But there is also wonder. And perhaps, a sliver of forgotten truth. Where are you listening from tonight? New York as autumn leaves tap your window? London under soft fog and old chimneys? Vancouver where city lights ripple across still water? Wherever you are, breathe in slowly. Let your mind soften. Let your body sink. You are not here to debate or decide. You are here to imagine. And if you're enjoying this journey, this quiet unfolding of Earth's hidden stories, gently tap subscribe. It helps this little sanctuary grow. Now, the vault is creaking open. A door between timelines. You're about to slip inside. Let's begin. The wind moves gently across the vast Giza plateau, brushing over stones that have seen more centuries than any living memory can hold. The night air carries a chill, softened by the last warmth of the setting sun, and the stars begin to awaken above the desert, distant and patient witnesses to what has been. There are no pharaohs here yet. No dynasties to claim ownership. No scribes to record the grand achievements of rulers. Only stone, sand, and the relentless passage of time. Long before the names Khufu, Khafre, or Menkaure would be whispered into history, before the Nile was immortalized in papyrus and ink, perhaps a civilization already dreamed in silence, building monuments whose purpose would escape all memory. Imagine standing on the edge of this plateau as the night deepens, feeling the cold stones beneath your fingers, tracing their edges as though you could sense the hands that once moved them. Could it be that these pyramids, rising in precise geometric perfection, were already ancient when the first hieroglyphs were carved? Could these shapes, enormous and enduring, predate the very concept of kingship in Egypt? Some scholars argue that the standard narrative, tidy and linear, fails to account for the anomalies scattered across the site. The Great Pyramid, they say, appears suddenly in human history, a leap in architectural sophistication seemingly out of nowhere. But when one gazes upon the desert horizon, one wonders whether the monument is the culmination of a long-forgotten story, one that predates dynasties, pharaohs, and even written language itself. The conventional story insists that Khufu ordered the construction of the Great Pyramid around 2560 BCE, employing tens of thousands of laborers wielding copper chisels and rope. According to this account, they worked tirelessly for decades, carving limestone blocks and hauling massive stones into place with primitive technology. Yet when we look closely, inconsistencies emerge. The pyramid contains no celebratory inscriptions or murals depicting its construction. Unlike other royal tombs, there are no elaborate records glorifying Khufu's name. Faint quarry marks bearing the pharaoh's name were discovered in hidden chambers, but their authenticity remains debated. Could a structure so precise, so immense, leave behind so little tangible proof of its makers? Inside the king's chamber rests a granite coffer, polished and untouched, empty and silent. It carries no trace of human remains, no evidence of elaborate funerary rituals, no soot to suggest torchlight illuminated the intricate chambers during construction. Modern experiments attempting to replicate these feats with bronze tools have largely failed. The stone appears to hold secrets of methods long lost. Perhaps the Great Pyramid was not originally a tomb, but a vessel for knowledge, a repository of ideas, or a marker of something far older than the dynasties that would one day claim it. Now picture the landscape in a time long before hieroglyphs. The Sahara was green, dotted with lakes and rivers, nourished by rainfall that had ceased thousands of years before the dynastic era. Tribes of people could have lived along the Nile, their settlements small yet capable of astonishing feats, building not for fame, not for gods, but to endure. The stones of Giza may have been part of a message to the future, a record of human ingenuity preserved through the ages. These ideas, expressed in granite and limestone, may have been meant to last beyond any ruler's name, beyond any recorded history. Could the pyramids themselves have been the final chapter of an even older story, a story lost beneath layers of sand and time? Geological evidence provides intriguing hints. The erosion patterns on the Sphinx and its surrounding enclosure suggest heavy rainfall and water erosion, phenomena that would have occurred in Egypt only during the African humid period, between roughly 14,500 and 5,500 years ago. The vertical fissures carved by water contrast sharply with the horizontal wind erosion more typical of desert environments. Robert Schoch, a geologist, has argued that these patterns imply the Sphinx could be far older than the Old Kingdom, potentially carved at the end of the last ice age. While mainstream Egyptologists often attribute the erosion to wind or rising groundwater, the debate remains unresolved, leaving room for speculation. Could the Sphinx have gazed across a verdant Nile valley while humans still lived without writing, without kings, crafting societies that left only whispers in stone? The technological feats observed in the pyramids also challenge conventional assumptions. The Great Pyramid aligns with true north with remarkable accuracy, its precision difficult to replicate even with modern instruments. The massive granite blocks in the king's chamber, weighing up to 80 tons, were quarried hundreds of miles away and shaped with exacting precision. Some engineers note drill marks and spiral grooves that suggest tools far more advanced than simple copper chisels. And yet, no records explain how ancient workers could transport, shape, and assemble such massive stones without the benefit of machinery. Could a forgotten civilization have mastered techniques now lost to history, their knowledge transmitted to the dynastic Egyptians as a heritage rather than an innovation? Astronomy offers another dimension to the mystery. The layout of the three main pyramids on the plateau mirrors the alignment of Orion's belt as it appeared around 10,500 BCE, long before the dynasties of Egypt. The Sphinx faces due east, perhaps observing the rising sun or celestial formations that marked equinoxes and seasons. The connection between these monumental stones and the stars hints at an understanding of astronomy far older than the official timeline suggests. Some have argued that the pyramids served as a map of the heavens, a terrestrial mirror to cosmic patterns, or as a calendar spanning millennia. Could ancient architects have intended to embed knowledge in stone, to preserve observations across the ages, anticipating civilizations that had not yet arisen? Beyond the stones themselves, one can envision the people who lived among them. Their settlements might have been modest, yet their comprehension of geometry, astronomy, and environmental rhythms could have been profound. Skeletal evidence from other early Nile communities shows careful healing and attention to injuries, suggesting a society that valued the well-being of its members. If similar practices occurred at Giza, perhaps those who maintained the site were not laborers in the conventional sense, but guardians of knowledge, caretakers of structures that conveyed meaning through form rather than text. The desert carries echoes of these ancient rhythms. Close your eyes and feel the sand shift beneath a cool breeze, carrying dust that has settled over centuries, layering memory atop memory. Hear the whisper of wind across the stones. The desert stretches endlessly, a tapestry of sand and stone that shimmers beneath the morning sun. Yet tonight, let us imagine it differently, cool, damp, and heavy with water that once coursed over the land in torrents. The Sphinx lies before us, colossal and silent, its enigmatic face gazing eastward as if anticipating the first rays of dawn. Around it, the limestone enclosure walls curve gently, their surfaces etched with undulating grooves, vertical waves that ripple across the stone in patterns both mesmerizing and perplexing. These marks are not shallow scratches carved by wind. They are deeper, more deliberate, shaped by the relentless passage of liquid over stone. A rain, a torrent, a flowing memory of water. The desert around it is now dry, scorched by millennia of sun, yet here, evidence lingers, whispering a story that challenges the official narrative of time. Robert Schoch, the geologist whose eyes traced every contour of the Sphinx, and John Anthony West, whose intuition and historical insight complemented the scientific, proposed an audacious theory. The patterns of erosion on the Sphinx and its enclosure indicate that they were carved under conditions far wetter than the modern Nile region has known in the last 7,000 years. Heavy rainfall, cascading in repeated downpours over centuries, would have sculpted the stone with waves and rounded edges, the vertical fissures deepened and widened by the persistent flow of water. Wind, sand, or human activity could never replicate such erosion. The marks are unmistakable for those willing to look closely. Nature's fingerprints etched over stone in a rhythm older than any pharaoh's reign. Picture the Sphinx in that forgotten era. The desert is alive, not barren. Rain drums on sandstone roofs and the surrounding limestone, pooling in shallow basins and carving grooves into stone that, thousands of years later, we still see. The air is humid and rich with the scent of wet earth, the breeze heavy with moisture. Perhaps the Nile flows wider and fuller, fed not only by its usual course but by rainfall that saturates the land, reshaping valleys and plains. Vegetation may have clung to patches of fertile soil, scattered trees providing shade, while early human communities inhabit the banks, unaware that they are standing beside a monument that will one day baffle civilizations far in the future. Now consider the scale of the Sphinx itself. Over 70 meters long, 20 meters high, carved from a single ridge of limestone, its human visage fused with a lion's body to embody strength, wisdom, and mystery. To imagine this figure enduring violent rainfall over millennia is to envision a landscape almost unimaginable. Storms battering stone with patience and power, water flowing relentlessly along walls and basins, chiseling and rounding edges into smooth curves that contrast with the angular precision of later pyramids. These waves of erosion, observed on the enclosure's vertical faces, cannot be explained by wind-blown sand alone. Wind leaves horizontal abrasions, uneven and harsh, but the Sphinx displays soft, vertical undulations as though shaped by liquid fingers of time. Schoch and West's observations point to a staggering implication. The Sphinx may have been constructed thousands of years earlier than conventional Egyptology asserts, perhaps more than 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. In this period, known as the Younger Dryas, the world underwent abrupt climatic upheavals. Glaciers retreated, seas rose, and some regions experienced intense rainfall after prolonged droughts. The Nile Valley itself may have been a different world, a river-laced savanna rich with lakes, rivers, and green floodplains, able to sustain both human and animal life in ways foreign to the modern desert eye. The Sphinx, in this vision, is not merely a product of the Old Kingdom. It is a witness to prehistory, a sentinel carved during an age that the written record never captured, a monument older than the concept of kingship, older than dynasties, older even than the hieroglyphs. To stand beside it in this imagined past is to feel time differently. The air smells of wet stone and fertile soil. Birds and mammals stir along the riverbanks. Rain hammers rhythmically against limestone walls, carving grooves that will endure long after the people themselves are gone. One can almost hear the low rumble of water moving through channels, pooling in depressions and spilling over edges, its persistent touch softening stone into the forms we recognize today. The Sphinx is more than a sculpture. It is an archive of climate, an enduring record of Earth's watery memory, silently defying the neat chronology of official narratives. This interpretation is not universally accepted, and controversy thrives. Traditional Egyptologists maintain that the Sphinx was carved under the reign of Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BCE, attributing the erosion to a combination of wind, temperature fluctuations, and rising groundwater. They argue that climate models, sediment studies, and archaeological context support the Old Kingdom date. Yet even within this debate, the evidence Schoch presented, the vertical, rounded erosion, the extent of weathering on the enclosure walls, and the discrepancy between wind erosion and observed patterns, cannot be ignored. There exists a tension between accepted history and geological observation, a tension that invites curiosity and imagination. Imagine then the builders, whoever they were, crafting the Sphinx in an era when rain fell with a frequency and intensity unknown for millennia thereafter. Their hands would shape stone under overcast skies, perhaps using tools rudimentary by today's standards but guided by a profound understanding of form and endurance. Each strike, each curve, each thoughtful touch is magnified by the storms around them. The water is both adversary and sculptor, carving alongside human effort to produce the monument that still watches over the desert. Could this collaboration between humans and nature have been intentional, an acknowledgement of climate's power, or purely incidental, a serendipitous alignment of skill and environmental circumstance? Schoch's hypothesis relies heavily on the understanding of limestone weathering. Limestone, soft and porous, reacts to chemical and mechanical erosion. When rainfall is heavy and consistent over long periods, water dissolves calcium carbonate, carving channels and creating rounded edges. The vertical grooves seen on the Sphinx's enclosure are emblematic of such processes. Rainwater, slightly acidic due to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, flows down faces repeatedly, accentuating natural weaknesses in the rock. Over centuries, the cumulative effect produces patterns distinct from wind erosion, which tends to abrade horizontally and unevenly. By comparing modern rainfall and erosion rates to the observed grooves, Schoch inferred that the Sphinx's enclosure could not have acquired its distinctive features under the climatic conditions present since the last 7,000 years. The notion that the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt invites broader speculation. Could advanced human settlements, now lost, have existed along the Nile or nearby regions, communities capable of monumental architecture far earlier than previously imagined? Anthropologists have discovered evidence of sophisticated hunter-gatherer societies in Africa that thrived during the end of the Ice Age, but no definitive record of construction on the scale of the Sphinx exists, at least not yet unearthed. The Sphinx, in this view, could be the solitary surviving witness of an ancient society, its creators' names swallowed by time, their knowledge hidden in plain sight, preserved in stone for thousands of years. Picture the Sphinx in twilight, rain soaking the stone, water dripping in rivulets that reflect fading sunlight. The face, partially eroded, bears the weight of millennia and the violence of storms, yet retains its serenity. Imagine the eyes catching glimmers of lightning across distant clouds, the roar of rain filling the enclosure, and the soft murmur of water against stone. This sensory experience, lost to the desert sands today, hints at an interaction between humans. Breathe slowly, absorbing the weight of millennia. Let the sound of imagined rainfall fill your mind, the rhythm soothing and steady. Feel the ancient stone beneath your hands, cool and damp in memory, as water shapes its contours in the slow patience of millennia. The Sphinx endures, timeless and enigmatic, a sentinel that has witnessed not just pharaohs but entire civilizations, the rise and fall of climates, the shifting of Earth itself. Its story is not confined to dynastic Egypt. It is a testament to human resilience, environmental change, and the enduring mystery of our planet. As the imagined rain fades, leaving only damp grooves and the soft murmur of runoff, consider the legacy of water and stone. The Sphinx's face, serene and contemplative, remains a mirror of time, reflecting both human curiosity and the planet's memory. Though the storms have passed and the desert has reclaimed dominance, the evidence endures, inscribed vertically in limestone walls, in undulating curves, in whispers of a climate that no longer exists. For those who observe with care, the Sphinx offers insight into a world far older than kings, dynasties, or written records. A world in which water, wind, and human effort collaborated to produce a monument that will endure until the end of days. Close your eyes and picture the Sahara not as an expanse of arid, golden sand, stretching endlessly under a merciless sun, but as a living, breathing landscape. A green Sahara. Rivers meander across vast plains, their waters glinting beneath the sun, while scattered acacia and dum palms provide dappled shade. The air is humid, rich with the scent of soil and vegetation, carrying the distant hum of insects and the calls of birds unknown to the modern desert. Lakes mirror the sky, vast and serene, fringed with reeds and grasses. Herds of antelope and gazelle traverse the savanna-like terrain, predators moving silently through brush, a cycle of life thriving in a world that today seems inconceivable. This is the African humid period, spanning roughly from 14,500 to 5,500 years ago, a chapter of history in which the Sahara was not a barren wasteland but a mosaic of fertile plains, watercourses, and life, and where human imagination may have flourished alongside nature's abundance. Imagine the implications of this verdant expanse for early human societies. The Sahara, often perceived as a barrier or void, was once a network of habitable zones, offering resources in abundance. Water, fertile soil, fish from rivers and lakes, wild game, and edible plants. Populations could move, adapt, and experiment with tools, trade, and architecture. Stone circles, megaliths, and other early constructions discovered in Saharan regions hint at cultural expression, ceremonial sites, and perhaps proto-urban planning. In such a landscape, monumental architecture becomes conceivable in a way that is nearly impossible under harsh, hyper-arid conditions. Vast stones could be transported more easily across softer, vegetated terrain. The labor force could rely on abundant resources for sustenance, and the climate itself might encourage experimentation with architectural forms that would later culminate in the construction of pyramids along the Nile. Visualize the Nile's floodplain during this green era, an artery feeding fertile lands and connecting the Sahara to the delta and beyond. Seasonal rains swell tributaries and rivers, nourishing pastures and wetlands, creating corridors for human migration and trade. These were not intermittent or erratic flows but a climate regime sustained for thousands of years, long enough to conceive of monumental works, to organize labor, and to develop symbolic architecture. Early humans may have stood at the edge of a lake, staring across placid waters toward rocky outcrops, imagining forms, figures, and structures that would one day be immortalized in stone. Could it be that the early conceptualization of pyramidal architecture, the alignment with celestial patterns, and the notion of monumental permanence were seated in this green Sahara, when life, water, and landscape provided both inspiration and feasibility? The African humid period is well documented through paleoclimatic data. Sediment cores, pollen analysis, and isotopic studies reveal cycles of rainfall that transformed the Sahara into grasslands, dotted with lakes and traversed by rivers. Fossil evidence confirms the presence of diverse fauna. Elephants, giraffes, hippopotamuses, and countless other species that would later vanish as aridification intensified. Rock art, etched on cliffs and boulders, depicts scenes of human life, animals, and possibly ritualistic activities, suggesting that cognition, culture, and creativity flourished in tandem with environmental abundance. Imagine a group of humans painting images of cattle or hunters along a riverside boulder. While rain falls gently in intermittent showers, the earth soft beneath their feet, their reflection rippling in pools of water. The act of creation, whether practical or symbolic, is inseparable from this environment, revealing the intimate relationship between climate and culture. Now, consider the paradox of memory and time. The Sahara of today, a sea of sand, a furnace under the midday sun, conceals the lush landscapes of prehistory. Dunes shift, rivers dry, and lakes vanish, leaving only traces, buried sediment, and echoes of a past that our eyes cannot perceive. The African humid period, while spanning nearly 10 millennia, eventually gave way to progressive aridification, reshaping ecosystems, forcing migrations, and challenging human ingenuity. Yet within these constraints lies a profound insight. The feasibility of monumental construction during the Green Sahara period would have been vastly superior to that during subsequent dry epochs. Transporting stones, organizing labor, and sustaining large communities becomes far more plausible when water, fertile soil, and abundant food are present. The imagination of builders, freed from constant struggle for survival, could turn toward the sky, toward symbolic forms, and toward permanence. Imagine standing on a plateau overlooking the central Sahara, watching a river glisten in sunlight as it winds through grasslands. Children play near its banks, their laughter echoing across space, while adults construct shelters of mud brick or stone. Some may lift stones together, experimenting with alignment and weight, laying the conceptual groundwork for structures that will outlast generations. Perhaps they observe celestial events, sunrise, sunset, the motion of stars, and begin to encode these observations into symbolic forms, gestures, or early architectural expressions. Could the first pyramidal ideas have been born not on the Nile's floodplain under dynastic Egypt, but here in the Green Sahara, where abundance allowed the mind to reach beyond immediate survival? There is also a temporal rhythm to consider. The African humid period did not exist as a monolithic era but oscillated in wet and dry cycles. Lakes expanded and contracted. Consider also the logistics. The Green Sahara would have provided not just water and vegetation but natural pathways and easier terrain. Stones could be quarried and transported using rolling logs or sleds over grassy plains, with minimal risk of being trapped in shifting sand. Labor forces could forage, hunt, and sustain themselves locally, reducing the need for long supply chains or constant rationing. Even the psychological endurance required to undertake monumental projects becomes more plausible when humans are nourished, hydrated, and inspired by a landscape that is generous rather than harsh. The feasibility of early architectural planning, symbolic construction, and proto-engineering thus rises dramatically within the context of this green Sahara. Now imagine the emotional and aesthetic resonance of such a landscape. Rain fills shallow basins, creating temporary ponds that mirror the sky. Wind rustles the leaves of scattered trees. Sunlight glints off water, dappling the terrain with shifting patterns. Early humans moving through this environment would have been attuned to the cycles of light and water, observing how the landscape changes over hours, days, and seasons. This heightened sensitivity could translate into artistic expression, ritualistic behavior, and the conceptualization of monumental forms intended to endure both climate and time. The green Sahara then is more than a setting. It is a crucible for imagination, cognition, and the genesis of monumental architecture. The question arises, could the earliest conceptualizations of pyramids, sphinxes, or other enduring structures have originated during this verdant era? While we cannot know with certainty, the hypothesis invites us to rethink timelines. Traditional Egyptologists situates monumental construction firmly within the Old Kingdom, around 4,500 years ago, under pharaohs such as Khufu and Khafre. Yet if we accept that environmental conditions were dramatically more favorable in the preceding millennia, it becomes plausible that conceptual, logistical, and experimental phases of monumental architecture were seeded long before dynastic Egypt, in a world that has since been buried under sand and memory. Picture a team of early builders, working near a wide river, the green plains stretching toward distant hills. Stones are quarried, measured, and arranged with attention and care. Water provides natural lubrication, easing transport and alignment. Teams of humans coordinate lifting, dragging, and positioning with rhythms attuned to the sun's path, the flow of water, and the endurance of the body. Perhaps they experiment with smaller protostructures, testing angles, balance, and aesthetic effect. These efforts may leave little trace now, but their echoes resonate in the forms that survive along the Nile. The green Sahara, in this sense, becomes both laboratory and inspiration, a landscape that nurtured the first seeds of monumental thought. Archaeological and paleoclimatic evidence continues to reveal the Sahara's hidden past. Fossilized riverbeds, preserved lake sediments, and pollen records testify to a landscape teeming with water and vegetation. Rock art documents fauna and human activity, including ritualistic or communal scenes. Such findings underscore the plausibility of sustained human presence, complex social organization, and perhaps even early engineering. The African humid period is not merely a curiosity. It is a key to unlocking scenarios in which monumental ideas could arise long before the deserts we now see would have allowed such endeavors. Imagine the green Sahara at dusk. Shadows lengthen across the plains, water reflects the hues of a setting sun, and creatures of the night begin to stir. Early humans gather around fires, exchanging stories, planning, observing the stars. They are aware, perhaps intuitively, of time, endurance, and the relationship between environment and aspiration. The lessons of rain, river, and fertility imprint themselves on consciousness, shaping the way humans think about permanence, community, and symbolic representation. It is within such an environment that the earliest notions of grandeur, of structures intended to endure generations, might take root. Consider also the interplay between the green Sahara and subsequent environmental change. As aridification intensified, forcing rivers to recede and lakes to vanish, human populations would have migrated toward the Nile, carrying knowledge, practices, and aspirations. The green Sahara may have served as incubator, a landscape in which monumental ideas were feasible, which were then transplanted to the Nile Valley when climatic conditions deteriorated. Thus, the feasibility of pyramid construction, the organization of labor, and the conceptual imagination necessary to undertake such projects may owe as much to this ancient green landscape as to dynastic ingenuity. The Green Sahara also encourages us to question assumptions about isolation and inspiration. Vast networks of rivers and lakes may have facilitated communication between communities, enabling exchange of ideas, techniques, and cultural practices. Trade, symbolic systems, and proto-rituals could traverse these watery corridors, creating a web of influence long before the Nile centralized power in the hands of pharaohs. Monumental architecture may, in this view, be the culmination of centuries of experimentation, environmental attunement, and collective imagination, rather than the product of a single ruler or dynasty. In the imagination, let us walk along a riverside plain. Water laps gently against stones, grasses sway in a soft breeze, and the scent of wet earth mingles with that of flowering plants. Early humans inspect stones, discuss dimensions, and test alignment with celestial bodies. They witness rainstorms that swell rivers and deepen channels, observing patterns and rhythms that may influence architectural choices. The experience of the environment, the tactile memory of water, the scent of vegetation, the visual impression of space and proportion, infuses their work with a sensitivity that endures in subsequent generations. As night falls over the Green Sahara, the fires of human communities flicker across the landscape, casting dancing light upon nearby water and vegetation. Constellations wheel overhead, guiding orientation and ritual. Ideas of permanence, endurance, and cosmic alignment are seated here, nourished by abundant resources, abundant time, and abundant inspiration. The Green Sahara, in all its verdant splendor, offers not just survival but a fertile ground for cognition, creativity, and monumental imagination. Even now, beneath the shifting sands of the modern desert, traces endure: fossilized river channels, scattered tools, remnants of lakes, and etched boulders. These fragments invite us to reconstruct an epoch in which the Sahara was alive, wet, and green, a landscape capable of sustaining the ambitions, experiments, and imagination of early humans. It is within this context that the earliest monumental ideas, later realized in stone along the Nile, may have been conceived. Pause and sense the environment. Hear the soft murmur of imagined rivers, smell the wet grasses, feel the cool breeze, and observe the reflection of sunlight on lakes. Imagine communities thriving, experimenting, building, and contemplating permanence. Imagine ideas of pyramids and monuments arising in minds nourished by abundance, facilitated by water, and inspired by the rhythm of a fertile, cyclical environment. The Green Sahara, forgotten and buried, whispers the origins of human ingenuity and the enduring desire to leave a mark upon the world. The morning does not begin with heat but with cold. A strange cold for Egypt. Not the dry, cracking chill of desert nights, but a softer breath, humid and heavy as if the earth itself still remembers glaciers. The sun, just a suggestion behind pale clouds, filters dimly through the mist that clings to the lowlands. And in the stillness, something ancient rises. Not sand, not stone, not wind, but time. Time layered like sediment, like memory, like breath. If you could stand on the Giza plateau not 5,000 years ago but 12, if your feet pressed into damp earth instead of dust, what would you see? Perhaps a land of river-woven plains. The Nile, swollen and wide, splitting into countless fingers that cradled the land like a mother's hand. On either side, meadows pulsed with life, acacia and papyrus swaying in rhythms we no longer know. Herds moved slowly through the fog, gazelle, antelope, the shadows of wild cattle with sweeping horns. Overhead, flocks crossed in silence. The air, cooler than today, shimmered with moisture. And across this green silence stood something out of place. A triangle of stone, too precise to be a mountain, too massive to be a shelter. Rising not from the ambitions of kings, but from something older. From memory itself. The Ice Age was ending. Glaciers retreated to the north like tired beasts. Global temperatures rose and seas lapped further inland. The Sahara for now was not yet desert. It was open. It was green. It was a cradle. Could a civilization have emerged here, not around scarcity but abundance? Not in the struggle for water but in a time when the earth was generous? This is the proposition that haunts the mist, that the pyramids were conceived, perhaps even constructed, during an era when the climate was moist, temperate, and lush. Scientific reconstructions of the African humid period, roughly 14,500 to 5,500 years ago, confirmed that the Sahara was then a savanna. Satellite imaging has traced the ghosts of vanished rivers and ancient lake beds now hidden under sand. Paleobotanical evidence, pollen trapped in cores of sediment, reveals grasslands and open woodlands where today there is only scorched rock. And from these once fertile plains come petroglyphs, rock carvings, of giraffes, hippos, and humans swimming. The people who lived then remembered water. They lived with it. And if they had the means, might they not have used that gift of climate to build? Building in wet conditions is fundamentally different from building in drought. Moving stone is easier with water. Foundations can be laid deeper in soft soil. Structures are less exposed to cracking and erosion during construction. If the Giza Plateau was a wetter place, its suitability for monumental architecture would have increased dramatically. The implications ripple outward. Perhaps what we call Old Kingdom engineering was not a miraculous leap, but a remnant. Perhaps those architects did not invent grandeur but inherited it. In this light, the pyramids do not mark the start of civilization. They mark its echo. Imagine walking toward the pyramid during one of those early mornings. The path is muddy beneath your feet. You hear frogs in the reeds. Your breath forms clouds. And above the trees it looms, its capstone catching the light, its base disappearing into mist. No tourists, no camels, no modern Cairo. Just the monument and the morning, and the quiet weight of something that does not belong to the present. What did they believe, those builders? Did they watch the stars shift over millennia and mark the heavens with stone? Did they use the rising of Orion or the setting of Leo not merely to measure time, but to remember it? Robert Bauval's Orion correlation theory, often dismissed by traditional Egyptologists, suggests that the alignment of the three great pyramids matches the stars of Orion's belt as they appeared in 10,500 BCE. This date corresponds with the vernal alignment of the Sphinx to the constellation Leo, which would have risen directly in its gaze during the spring equinox of that same epoch. If true, it is not just a celestial coincidence. It is a date stamp carved into landscape. It is a message from a lost chapter. And still the mist thickens. The closer we draw to certainty, the more the picture blurs. Archaeology works best with artifacts, pottery shards, bones, inscriptions. But the people of this hypothetical Green Egypt may have left none. Their homes would have been wood, clay, biodegradable. Their tools simple. Their names never written. But their vision may remain in stone. And what of the Sphinx? Her body worn smooth by water, not sand. Her shoulders bearing not just erosion, but memory. The geologist Robert Schoch pointed to the vertical fluting on her enclosure walls, undulating rounded patterns unlike wind erosion, more like centuries of rainfall. Rainfall that hasn't touched this plateau for over 7,000 years. That evidence alone suggests a radically earlier origin. Perhaps as old as the mist that once fed this land. Let's not forget, climate is not static. The African humid period was a gift of orbit and tilt, Milankovitch cycles that wobbled Earth's relationship to the sun, creating a climate window that would later slam shut. When it did, the rain stopped. Forests turned to dust. Rivers shrank. The Sahara hardened. And if anything great had been built, it would have been left behind like a book dropped in the sand, its pages torn out by time. What if that book is the pyramid? What if, as the climate shifted, the builders fled? Not in panic, but in quiet resignation. A slow exodus southward, toward greener valleys, toward the Nile, toward places where their children might survive. They carried little, except what could not be left behind. Stories, techniques, perhaps even a new purpose for what they once called sacred. And what of those who came after? The dynasties that rose in Egypt centuries later may have seen these silent giants and woven them into new myths. They recarved, restored, renamed. The Sphinx's face may not be original. The tombs around the plateau may have been added like footnotes. But the body of the work, the language of its shape, its silence, its presence, remains older than the words written around it. This is what the mist allows us to consider: that the pyramid was once green, that its birth was not in sand but in rain, that it rose not under the hot breath of Ra, but under clouded skies and trees waving in slow wind. Perhaps we resist this version of history not because it lacks evidence, but because it challenges our narrative of progress. We like to think we began small and grew steadily upward. But what if we fell from a height we no longer remember? What if we are the descendants of survivors, not pioneers but refugees from time? Tonight, as the world quiets around you, imagine the Giza Plateau not as a tourist site, but as a memory. Imagine mist curling along its edges, birds calling in strange dialects, water pooling in low stone hollows, the smell of wet earth, leaves, time. A pyramid not yet worn by sandstorms, glistening faintly with moisture. Not a relic, not a ruin, but a beginning. The night sky is a tapestry, stitched with stars older than human memory, older than kingdoms, older than the very stones we walk upon. When we look upward at Orion, the hunter, we see familiar shapes, constellations memorized in childhood, imagined in myths, traced in the imagination of sailors and shepherds alike. But what if Orion is more than a pattern in the sky? What if its alignment is a map, a celestial blueprint intentionally mirrored on Earth? Tonight, let us wander across the Giza Plateau, not as archaeologists seeking tombs, but as astronomers reading a code written in stone. Robert Bauval, a Belgian-born researcher whose work challenges conventional Egyptology, proposed what has come to be known as the Orion correlation theory. According to Bauval, the three great pyramids, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, do not stand haphazardly on the plateau. Their arrangement is deliberate, echoing the alignment of the three stars in Orion's belt, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. The smallest, offset star corresponds to the pyramid of Menkaure, while the larger pyramids echo the bright two stars. To look at the pyramids from above is to see the sky projected onto the land, an intimate marriage of stone and starlight. But this map is not contemporary. Bauval's calculations suggest the alignment matches the sky as it appeared around 10,500 BCE. The precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over millennia, means that stars drift relative to our seasonal calendar. Only in that distant epoch would Orion's belt have precisely mirrored the layout we see today in the Giza pyramids. In other words, the builders may have encoded a timestamp into the landscape itself, a signature left for those capable of reading it, or perhaps a message to the future, waiting for eyes that could comprehend. Imagine standing on the plateau at dusk. The air is humid, carrying the scent of wet earth and moss from distant Nile tributaries. The pyramids, shrouded in the golden glow of sunset, rise like colossal markers on the horizon. Overhead, Orion glides slowly into place, its three belt stars tracing the same pattern that echoes below. It is a moment of perfect symmetry between heaven and earth. The hunter's gaze is not random, nor is the placement of the stones beneath our feet. They are entwined, intentional, as though the earth itself is reading the cosmos back to us in stone. And the Sphinx, that enigmatic sentinel, holds her own secret. Facing due east, she greets the rising sun every day, but during the spring equinox of 10,500 BCE, she would have gazed directly at the constellation of Leo as it climbed the horizon. The Sphinx is not merely a lion with a human face. It is a terrestrial counterpart to the heavens, a mirror that reflects celestial order onto the land. The alignment of Leo, the king of beasts, facing the Nile's fertile corridor, may have been intended as a symbolic marker. Life, power, and continuity mirrored in both sky and stone. Consider the implications. If the Giza Plateau was planned with such astronomical precision, we must ask, who possessed the knowledge to translate stars into architecture at such a scale? Conventional narratives credit the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure as masterminds. Yet the scientific and technical sophistication suggested by these alignments implies knowledge that may have been inherited, not invented. It is one thing to build a massive stone tomb. It is another to carve a city-sized clock into the desert, one that encodes celestial patterns preserved across 10,000 years. The process of surveying the plateau would have required careful measurement of the stars. It would have demanded understanding the movements of constellations across centuries. Tools would have been rudimentary by modern standards, yet the precision achieved, aligned to a fraction of a degree, suggests methods or techniques now lost to history. Some engineers speculate about primitive sighting devices, others about the use of water-level grids, or the observation of shadows at specific times of the year. Each theory is fascinating, yet incomplete, leaving us with a lingering question. Did the builders possess a knowledge we can only imagine, or did they work with a technology that no longer exists? And then there is the extraordinary symbolism. Orion, associated with Osiris, the god of rebirth, life after death, and cosmic order, connects the pyramids to more than astronomy. It connects them to philosophy, to human contemplation of eternity. The alignment is not mere coincidence. It may be a conscious effort to integrate the cycles of the heavens into the permanence of stone, an expression of the desire to synchronize mortal life with cosmic rhythm. The pyramids become more than monuments. They become a meditation on time itself. We should also consider the margins of error, the subtle deviations. Menkaure's pyramid is slightly offset from the alignment of Orion's belt, just as Mintaka is offset from the other two stars. Is this a flaw or a deliberate encoding? Could the ancients have left these imperfections to mark a nuance in knowledge, a subtlety in cosmic symbolism, or even a reflection of the Earth's shifting tilt over time? Scholars debate, and the debate itself reminds us that certainty is rarely absolute when time stretches across millennia. Scientific investigation into these alignments is ongoing. Muon radiography has revealed hidden cavities within the Great Pyramid, spaces that may once have contained tools, records, or ceremonial objects. Although the interior chambers remain largely unexplored, each discovery reinforces the notion that the pyramids were designed with multiple purposes: spiritual, astronomical, and perhaps even technological. Robert Schoch has noted geological evidence consistent with older foundations, supporting the possibility that the site predates dynastic Egypt. John Anthony West emphasizes that the Sphinx's erosion patterns, combined with astronomical alignment, challenge conventional timelines, inviting us to imagine a civilization that thought in both stone and star. Picture, then, a night 12,000 years ago. The plateau is alive with water and green life. People move quietly among the rising stones, measuring, aligning, observing. Stars trace their slow arcs above, and the builders marked them in stone. They are not pharaohs, they are visionaries, chroniclers of time, sculptors of eternity. And as the sun rises and the mist dissipates, the pyramid stands silently, a terrestrial echo of celestial order, a monument to both knowledge and imagination. As you listen, imagine Orion arching over the plateau tonight, mirrored below in geometry and purpose. Feel the connection between earth and sky, between our ancient past and the stars above. Consider that what we see today may be the surviving remnants of an endeavor that once reached for the cosmos itself, a record left for us to find, to wonder at, and to meditate upon. The stones beneath our feet, worn smooth by millennia of wind and water, may still pulse with that original intention. Each edge, each alignment, each shadow cast in the rising sun carries the whispers of astronomers long gone, reminding us that civilization is both fragile and enduring, that memory can be carved into rock, and that the sky itself has always been a canvas for human thought. And so, as the stars wheel above and the desert sleeps, we trace the Orion map once more. The pyramids are not merely relics. They are coordinates in a story written across time, pointing to an epoch before history, before pharaohs, when humans first gazed upward and translated wonder into stone. They invite us to do the same, look up, breathe, imagine, and connect the earth to the vast, silent, unending cosmos. The first time you touch granite, you feel a resistance that defies imagination. Its surface is unyielding, cold, and smooth under your fingertips, a stone that has resisted erosion and weathering for eons. Now imagine shaping that same stone into blocks weighing dozens of tons, carving them into precise angles, and fitting them together with a tolerance so fine that a knife blade cannot pass between the joints. This is what we find inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, and it is here that the mystery deepens. How were these stones cut, polished, and transported with such perfection? Christopher Dunn, an engineer and researcher whose meticulous studies have focused on ancient stonework, emphasizes the challenge. Granite is one of the hardest natural stones on Earth, second only to diamonds in terms of Mohs hardness in certain compositions. Today, cutting granite requires diamond-tipped saws, industrial machinery, and advanced knowledge of tensile strength. Yet inside the king's chamber, the sarcophagus rests upon massive granite slabs, each shaped and joined with an accuracy that even modern engineering struggles to replicate. There are precisely cut grooves, remarkably straight channels, and corners so sharp they defy expectations. How could the ancient Egyptians, armed with copper chisels, stone hammers, and sand abrasives, achieve this level of precision? The king's chamber itself is constructed entirely of granite transported from Aswan, nearly 800 kilometers upriver. Some blocks weigh as much as 80 tons. Transporting stones of this magnitude without modern machinery, without cranes or hydraulics, is already an engineering marvel. But to then cut them with such precision, drilling exact circular holes and creating perfectly straight channels, suggests a level of mechanical understanding that appears almost anachronistic. Dunn and other researchers argue that the circular holes in the granite, some drilled through thick slabs, display features consistent with advanced rotary tools and controlled, uniform motion, leaving behind spiral marks that are extraordinarily precise. Imagine standing inside the chamber. The air is cool and dry, the shadows of massive stones stretching across the floor. Your hands trace the edges of a block. They are smooth, almost polished, the result of grinding and shaping with astonishing care. Every face aligns perfectly with the adjoining stones. No mortar is visible. No cement. Only flawless contact, precision that would challenge even modern engineers working with industrial-grade machinery. This meticulous craftsmanship extends beyond simple flat surfaces. There are internal grooves, dovetail joints, and circular cavities that seem purpose-built for mechanisms we may never fully understand. Modern attempts to replicate these cuts using only copper tools consistently fail to achieve the same precision. Some researchers have experimented with sand abrasion techniques, attempting to cut granite using copper saws combined with quartz sand. While rudimentary shaping is possible, the degree of accuracy, micron-level alignment and perfectly drilled cylindrical holes, remains unattainable without machinery far beyond what is believed to have existed during the Fourth Dynasty. These observations raise profound questions. Was the ancient civilization of Giza in possession of techniques that have since been lost? Could there have been tools made of materials harder than copper, perhaps even advanced alloys, that have not survived in the archaeological record? Or were there entirely different principles at work, using techniques now unknown to modern science, such as sonic cutting, high-speed rotary abrasion, or some manipulation of stone that we cannot yet imagine? The stones themselves provide evidence, and yet they are mute. They hint at a technology that seems impossible within the framework of traditional Egyptology. Christopher Dunn has argued that the design of the Great Pyramid's internal passages reflects not just architectural planning but a profound understanding of mechanics. The corbelled ceilings, the relieving chambers above the king's chamber, the precision of the joints, all of these features suggest that the builders anticipated enormous stress and weight distribution. To do so required more than trial and error. It required foresight, calculations, and tools that could manipulate hard stone without shattering it. Even modern engineers studying the pyramid are astonished by the sophistication of these solutions. Consider the implications. If such technology existed 12,000 years ago, or even 10,000, it would challenge the conventional timeline of human technological development. Archaeology tells us that copper tools were the apex of metallurgy in pre-dynastic Egypt. Yet here, deep within the heart of the Great Pyramid, are stones carved with precision that surpasses the limits of copper chisels. Could there have been a civilization whose knowledge predated the pharaohs? A civilization that mastered mechanical processes now lost to time? If so, the pyramids are not merely tombs. They are relics of a forgotten era of engineering mastery. The complexity is compounded by the scale. Many of the granite blocks are not only cut but also placed in intricate arrangements. The king's chamber is a perfect rectangle, each stone seamlessly abutting the next. The walls have circular holes, some apparently drilled to hold plugs or mechanisms. The precision suggests an understanding of alignment, geometry, and mechanics that would be remarkable even with today's technology. Researchers like Dunn argue that such craftsmanship is evidence of machine-age engineering applied millennia before the Industrial Revolution. Visualize the process. A massive block is quarried, transported hundreds of kilometers, and then positioned with astonishing accuracy. Artisans drill holes, carve channels, and polish surfaces, all without splitting the stone. Each cut is deliberate, uniform, and exact. Mistakes would be catastrophic. One miscalculation could fracture a block irreversibly. Yet the builders succeeded repeatedly, across hundreds of tons of stone. Some have speculated that the answer lies in lost tools. Mechanical devices whose design and materials have disappeared from the archaeological record. Others propose alternative energy sources, water lubrication, vibration techniques, or controlled abrasion using unknown principles. Dunn emphasizes that the markings found on the granite are consistent with rotary motion, suggesting a mechanical rotation akin to a modern drill press, but executed on a scale that seems impossible with the primitive materials available at the time. And yet, the evidence is undeniable. The granite is cut, polished, and shaped with exquisite care. The king's chamber and other internal passages resist attempts at simple explanation. The precision, the smoothness, the sophistication, all suggest a level of technological capability that does not fit neatly into the conventional historical timeline. It implies a lost understanding of materials, mechanics, and geometry, one that has vanished over millennia. We must also consider the human factor. The artisans responsible for these stones would have required not only tools but immense skill, knowledge, and coordination. Were they engineers, mathematicians, and craftsmen of unparalleled talent? Or did they have access to techniques that made the impossible routine? Perhaps we cannot separate skill from technology, perhaps one implies the other. The stones whisper of human ingenuity beyond our grasp, of hands that worked with understanding and methods we cannot fully replicate today. The question then arises, why did this knowledge vanish? How could a civilization capable of such feats leave so little behind? Perhaps the secrets were deliberately hidden, passed down only to select individuals, or perhaps the knowledge simply faded as dynasties rose and fell, the memory of technique lost amidst the tides of time. We may never know. Imagine walking through the chamber today. The granite walls tower above, their surfaces smooth and flawless. You run your fingers along a drilled hole and feel the spiral grooves left by an unknown instrument. You measure the angles, marvel at the fit, and realize that for thousands of years, no one has been able to replicate this perfection. The stones, in their silent majesty, are a testament to mastery now lost, a puzzle left for us to wonder at, a challenge that transcends centuries. As you leave the chamber, the air still and echoing, consider that each granite block may carry its own story. They are not mere materials, they are messages. Messages of precision, knowledge, and capability that surpass what is recorded in history books. They urge us to reconsider our assumptions, to question the linear narratives of technological progress, and to imagine civilizations capable of feats that strain our understanding. In the end, the granite blocks of the Great Pyramid are both a monument and a riddle. They speak of impossible stones, lost tools, and forgotten knowledge. They challenge our assumptions about human history and compel us to wonder at what was possible long before copper chisels and dynasties, long before pharaohs walked the land. They are, perhaps, the remnants of a civilization whose mastery of materials and mechanics echoes silently across the desert, waiting for our understanding to catch up. And as night falls over Giza, the shadows of these impossible stones stretch long across the plateau. The air carries the scent of stone dust and sand, the hum of the desert wind mingling with the memory of hands that once carved perfection into granite. In their silence, the stones ask a question that transcends millennia. What other knowledge have we lost, and how might it reshape our understanding of human potential if ever it were rediscovered? The Great Pyramid of Giza has fascinated humanity for millennia, not merely for its scale or precision, but for the profound mystery embedded in its hollow chambers. To walk through its passageways is to enter a space both ancient and paradoxical, a tomb that contains no corpse, no treasures, no inscriptions that celebrate a king's life. Conventional archaeology teaches that the pyramid was constructed as the tomb of Pharaoh Khufu, yet the evidence within its chambers challenges this assertion in a way that continues to provoke debate and speculation. The king's chamber, located at the heart of the pyramid, is perhaps the most telling space. Carved entirely from massive granite blocks, it houses a solitary sarcophagus, yet when explorers opened it in the 19th and 20th centuries, no human remains were found. Not a bone, not a fragment of linen, not a trace of resin or funerary oils. Around the sarcophagus, the walls are bare, unadorned, and cold. There are no inscriptions naming Khufu, no painted murals depicting his divine journey, no offerings to honor a deceased ruler. By every conventional measure, it is an empty tomb. This absence is striking when compared to all other known royal tombs of Egypt. In the Valley of the Kings, sarcophagi are surrounded by elaborate inscriptions and artifacts meant to guide the deceased into the afterlife. Mummies are meticulously wrapped, treasures of gold and stone accompany them, and symbolic reliefs narrate their divine journey. The Great Pyramid, by contrast, is devoid of all such markers. The scale and sophistication of its construction suggest a project of immense human labor and organization, yet the final product contains no sign of its supposed occupant. The anomaly raises profound questions. Why would a civilization capable of building such monumental architecture leave a tomb so bereft of the hallmarks of royalty? Was Khufu ever entombed here at all, or is the narrative of the pyramid as his resting place a later imposition by historians seeking to explain a structure whose original purpose was already forgotten? Some scholars propose that looting over the centuries could explain the absence of burial goods, yet there are compelling arguments against this. The sarcophagus itself, made of solid granite, shows no signs of disturbance or damage, suggesting it was never filled in the first place. Moreover, if looters had stripped the tomb, one would still expect to find residual traces, fragments of wood, cloth, or resins, but the chambers are astonishingly sterile. This astonishing lack has fueled alternative theories that challenge the traditional narrative. Among the most intriguing is the Giza power hypothesis, which proposes that the pyramid was not intended as a tomb at all but rather as a functional device designed to harness, store, or transmit energy. Proponents of this hypothesis point to the precision of the pyramid's geometry, the alignment with celestial bodies, and the internal structure of its chambers as indicative of a technological purpose. If one considers the possibility that the Great Pyramid was built as a machine rather than a mausoleum, the empty chambers become less a mystery and more a feature, a space necessary for the conduction of forces we may not yet fully understand. Imagine the king's chamber not as a burial room, but as a resonating cavity. The walls, carved from granite, could act as conductors or reflectors of energy, amplifying vibrations or electromagnetic phenomena. The so-called air shafts, previously thought to serve religious or ventilation purposes, could instead have served to direct energy along precise vectors. The lack of a mummy or ritualistic artifacts makes sense in this context. No human remains were necessary because the pyramid's purpose was not funerary but functional. The emptiness, rather than a failure of planning or consequence of looting, is intentional, a deliberate design feature that preserves the purity of the chamber's function. Another facet of the empty tomb puzzle is the corollary absence of inscriptions or artistic embellishments. Ancient Egyptian tombs almost always feature hieroglyphics that narrate the life and divine status of the occupant. Temples, tombs, and pyramids alike often carry stories carved in stone to ensure continuity of memory and spiritual guidance. Yet the Great Pyramid, with all its monumental investment, contains no such narrative for Khufu. The absence of commemorative hieroglyphs has led some researchers to speculate that the original builders may have been focused on something beyond human legacy, a project aimed at interaction with natural or cosmic forces, one that transcended earthly kingship. The notion that the Great Pyramid was never a tomb gains further support from comparative analysis. Other pyramids, such as those built for Pharaoh Djoser or Sneferu, show clear signs of funerary purpose. Burial chambers filled with offerings, chapels for rituals, and inscriptions honoring the king. The stark contrast between these pyramids and Khufu's Great Pyramid underscores the anomaly. It suggests that if Khufu's name was ever associated with the pyramid, it might have been a later attribution, imposed by later generations who sought to explain the mysterious structure within the familiar framework of a royal tomb. Archaeologists have long wrestled with the contradictions. Some maintain that the absence of remains and artifacts is an aberration explainable by time, theft, or incomplete excavations. Others argue that the pyramid's construction predates conventional dynastic records, suggesting that the project could have been undertaken by an earlier, now lost civilization whose intentions were not funerary at all. If the latter is true, the Great Pyramid represents a continuity of knowledge and purpose that predates Khufu by centuries, perhaps millennia. The implications of such an understanding are profound. If the Great Pyramid is not a tomb, then much of what we believe about ancient Egyptian civilization, the linear progression of dynasties, the centrality of pharaohs, the function of monumental architecture, must be reconsidered. The pyramid may not merely reflect religious devotion or funerary practice but an entirely different form of human enterprise, one focused on engineering, astronomy, energy, or some combination thereof. Its empty chambers are not anomalies. They are essential features of a design whose purpose remains elusive to modern eyes. Consider the psychological and symbolic power of emptiness. In many cultures, voids and blank spaces are treated as conduits for energy, focus, or spiritual resonance. By maintaining a chamber empty, the builders may have been preserving a space capable of amplifying forces, a vacuum necessary for some function lost to us. The empty sarcophagus, silent and unadorned, may represent not failure but intention, a placeholder for forces rather than flesh. Explorers who have ventured into the pyramid's interior often describe a palpable sense of awe and disorientation. The spaces are vast, geometric, and precise, yet their purpose is unclear. When one steps into the grand gallery, climbs the corbelled walls, and approaches the king's chamber, the mind naturally searches for familiar markers, inscriptions, artifacts, and evidence of a tomb. Finding none, one is left to confront the structure on its own terms, to imagine a civilization whose priorities were strikingly different from those recorded in conventional history. The Giza power hypothesis, controversial as it may be, offers a compelling framework. It envisions the pyramid as a resonant instrument, a machine capable of harnessing energy from the earth or sky. Whether this energy was acoustic, electrical, or otherwise is unknown, but proponents point to the pyramid's precise alignment with cardinal points, its internal geometry, and its massive, carefully joined stonework as evidence that function was a driving concern. Within this model, the empty tomb becomes an elegant solution rather than an anomaly, a necessary condition for energy transmission, free from interference or contamination. Skeptics of the energy hypothesis often deride it as speculation or pseudoscience, yet the absence of traditional tomb markers remains a fact that cannot be ignored. No mummy, no grave goods, no divine inscriptions. Only massive stones, carefully placed, with corridors and chambers aligned to cosmic and terrestrial features. The Great Pyramid's interior may have been intentionally left empty to preserve a function or effect that is invisible to us, yet was fully understood by the original builders. Imagine standing in the king's chamber in the still heat of a Giza afternoon, sunlight filtering in through tiny ventilation shafts, dust motes dancing in the narrow beams. The walls are immense, polished, and unbroken. Your eyes trace the lines of the sarcophagus. You feel the cool stone under your fingertips. There is nothing inside, no sign of human occupation. And yet, the air hums with history, with human ambition, with the echoes of a design whose full meaning is hidden. The emptiness itself speaks louder than any inscription ever could, inviting contemplation, speculation, and reverence. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the empty tomb is humility. It forces us to question assumptions, to confront the limitations of our understanding, and to recognize that not all human achievement is accounted for in the historical record. The Great Pyramid challenges the narrative of the past and opens the mind to possibilities that stretch beyond conventional timelines, technologies, and motivations. Its chambers, silent and unoccupied, are simultaneously a mystery, a marvel, and a message that human ingenuity, in forms we may not yet comprehend, has existed long before the rise of recorded history. As night falls over the Giza plateau, the pyramid stands tall, its shadow stretching across the desert. The king's chamber, the grand gallery, and all inner spaces remain untouched by the passage of millennia, empty yet full of significance. The absence of Khufu is not a deficiency but a prompt, urging us to see the structure not merely as a tomb, but as an enduring enigma, a monument to lost knowledge, to questions yet unanswered, and to the possibility that the greatest mysteries of human history lie not in what we find, but in what is deliberately left empty. When one steps back from the imposing structures of Giza, from the precise, massive stones of the Great Pyramid and the silent grandeur of the Sphinx, a question begins to take shape. Is this sophistication unique, a local anomaly, or part of a broader, global phenomenon? To view the mysteries of Giza in isolation is to ignore the threads of a tapestry that stretches across continents, time zones, and millennia. When we examine other megalithic sites, from Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, to Pumapunku in Bolivia to Baalbek in Lebanon, a striking pattern emerges, one that hints at a shared capacity, perhaps even a shared source, of monumental knowledge that predates the conventional history of civilization. Göbekli Tepe stands as a sentinel over the beginnings of human ingenuity, a site constructed roughly 11,600 years ago, long before the advent of agriculture. The scale, precision, and symbolic sophistication of its stone circles challenge the assumption that only settled, agrarian societies could undertake complex construction projects. Massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing as much as 20 tons, were quarried, transported, and carved with reliefs depicting animals, abstract symbols, and enigmatic motifs. For millennia, these stones rested on the plateau of southeastern Anatolia, untouched, yet radiating human intent that seems, at first glance, astonishingly advanced for a time when hunter-gatherers were still the primary mode of human subsistence. Compare this to Giza. The Great Pyramid, with its colossal stones and precise alignments, often dated around 4,500 years ago, shares an unmistakable quality with Göbekli Tepe: the capability to manipulate enormous megaliths with exacting precision. Whether it is a pillar shaped to bear weight or a pyramid block cut and fitted to millimeter accuracy, the technical demands surpass what is expected of a society supposedly still in its formative technological stages. While Göbekli Tepe predates Khufu by more than 7,000 years, the echoes of intent, knowledge, and organizational capacity seem remarkably consonant. Pumapunku in Bolivia adds another dimension to this puzzle. Part of the Tiwanaku complex near Lake Titicaca, Pumapunku showcases blocks carved with precise right angles, interlocking grooves, and complex notches, some of which weigh over 100 tons. The precision with which these stones were cut and placed is so extreme that modern engineers struggle to replicate the techniques using only the tools believed to have been available at the time. Pumapunku, often dated around 5,000 years ago, also challenges the notion that ancient civilizations were technologically primitive. Its existence alongside other advanced megalithic constructions suggests a distributed knowledge network, one that transcended local traditions and geographical isolation. Baalbek in Lebanon further complicates the narrative. The massive stones known as the trilithon, forming part of the foundation of the Temple of Jupiter, each weigh over 800 tons. These blocks, carved with precision, transported over rugged terrain, and arranged with astonishing geometric accuracy, stand as an enduring testament to ancient mastery of engineering. How, in the absence of known heavy machinery, did humans accomplish this feat thousands of years ago? The similarities between Baalbek, Pumapunku, Göbekli Tepe, and Giza suggest that we may not be dealing with isolated instances of genius but rather manifestations of a common heritage, an advanced, perhaps forgotten, understanding of megalithic construction. Graham Hancock, a controversial yet influential researcher, has proposed that such sites are remnants of a lost advanced civilization, a global culture whose knowledge has largely vanished from the historical record. Hancock suggests that survivors of cataclysmic events preserved fragments of this wisdom, which later cultures attempted to reconstruct within their own technological frameworks. According to this hypothesis, Giza is not merely an Egyptian achievement but part of a continuum, a late chapter in a story whose origins may stretch back tens of thousands of years. Göbekli Tepe, then, is not an anomaly but an earlier manifestation of the same drive, the creation of monumental symbolic spaces intended to encode knowledge, mark celestial cycles, or manipulate energies unknown to modern science. To understand these sites as interconnected rather than isolated opens new interpretive possibilities. Consider the recurring patterns: massive stones, precise geometric manipulation, symbolic carvings, and astronomical alignments. Whether the Sphinx gazes toward Leo, the pyramids align with Orion's belt, or Göbekli Tepe's pillars depict constellations, there is a consistent engagement with the cosmos. Puma Punku's interlocking stones suggest engineering knowledge that allows for thermal expansion, seismic stability, and durable construction. Baalbek's trilithon foundations reveal an understanding of weight distribution and stability at scales that boggle the modern mind. Across continents, across millennia, similar challenges elicited strikingly similar solutions, hinting at shared principles of engineering, astronomy, and perhaps metaphysics. But there is more than technical mastery. There is the question of purpose. Why devote extraordinary labor, sustained over decades or even centuries, to structures that do not fit neatly into the historical framework of functional architecture? Göbekli Tepe appears ceremonial, not domestic or agricultural. Puma Punku's massive stones bear no inscriptions suggesting kingship or conquest. Giza's empty tombs raise questions of function beyond burial. Baalbek's temples, though religious, are massive beyond necessity for worship alone. Across all these sites, human effort seems directed toward something larger than everyday life. Perhaps spiritual, perhaps energetic, perhaps an archive of knowledge encoded in stone. The possibility of a unified source civilization emerges naturally from these observations. Could there have been a shared body of knowledge or cultural memory that informed the construction of megalithic sites across the globe? If so, its scale and sophistication challenge the linear progression model of history, which assumes gradual technological evolution from simple to complex. Instead, we may be witnessing a pattern of resurgence. Periodic bursts of advanced capability that appear, influence generations, and then fade, leaving tantalizing evidence in stone and earth. Geographically and temporally, these sites are separated by thousands of miles and millennia, yet their similarities persist. Could oral traditions, migratory patterns, or lost seafaring capabilities have transmitted this knowledge? Some researchers suggest that survivors of catastrophic events, such as the end of the last ice age or local cataclysms, may have carried specialized techniques across continents, encoding lessons into monumental architecture. Others speculate that these constructions were independent rediscoveries of similar solutions to universal challenges: structural stability, astronomical observation, and symbolic communication. However, the degree of precision, the recurrence of geometric motifs, and the sophisticated understanding of stonework push the boundaries of mere coincidence. A trapezoidal block in Puma Punku interlocks with such exactness that it appears almost modular. A 2,000-ton stone at Baalbek shows evidence of planar smoothing that defies conventional explanations. Göbekli Tepe's T-shaped pillars align with astronomical markers that require careful observation over generations. These are not random, local solutions. They suggest a systematic understanding of both physical principles and long-term temporal cycles. Furthermore, the symbolic and possibly ceremonial intent is notable. Across all sites, motifs recur. Animal reliefs, celestial references, geometric abstraction. Even the positioning of structures in relation to water, mountains, and horizons suggests an awareness of landscape as a medium, a canvas upon which knowledge, ritual, and energy could converge. The notion of a unified source civilization, then, is not merely about tools or techniques. It encompasses worldview, cosmology, and an integrative understanding of humans within the natural and celestial environment. Critics argue that connecting these sites under a single civilization is speculative, perhaps even fanciful. Yet the convergences are hard to dismiss entirely. The technological leaps represented by these constructions occur in contexts traditionally thought incapable of such sophistication. They demand extraordinary planning, social organization, and possibly engineering knowledge that we cannot easily account for. To explain these feats purely through incremental, localized evolution strains credibility. A more holistic view, acknowledging the possibility of a shared legacy or knowledge network, accommodates the evidence without forcing it into a conventional narrative. The idea is both humbling and exhilarating. To recognize that human ancestors, millennia before the rise of pharaohs, kings, or empires, possessed knowledge capable of moving, carving, and arranging stone with precision, of encoding astronomical cycles into architecture, is to confront a history far richer than textbooks suggest. It suggests that civilization's arc is not linear but cyclical, punctuated by periods of extraordinary insight, periods in which humans harness capabilities that have since faded, only to be rediscovered in fragments by later generations. Giza, Göbekli Tepe, Puma Punku, Baalbek. These sites collectively form a web of knowledge, a scattered archive written in stone. To consider them together invites a perspective that transcends national histories, chronological boundaries, and conventional archaeology. It encourages the imagination to entertain the possibility that humanity's story is deeper, older, and more interconnected than we have dared to imagine. Perhaps these monuments are not merely remnants of individual cultures but markers of a shared heritage, a testimony to a time when humans possessed understanding, ambition, and craftsmanship on a scale that challenges the very foundations of historical assumption. As the sun sets over the Giza Plateau, casting long shadows across the pyramids, the mind naturally drifts toward distant lands. One can picture the rising sun illuminating Göbekli Tepe's T-pillars, the towering stones at Puma Punku catching the wind, and the colossal blocks of Baalbek reflecting afternoon light. Across deserts, plateaus, and mountains, a quiet resonance connects these monuments, a reminder that the capacity for wonder, precision, and monumental achievement is a constant in the human story. The stones speak across time, whispering of a knowledge once widespread, partially lost, but not entirely forgotten. In contemplating this network of ancient sites, the idea of a unified source civilization becomes less a matter of fantasy and more a plausible hypothesis, a framework for understanding why such disparate locations exhibit such extraordinary and consistent mastery. It suggests that the stories of human ingenuity we inherit are partial, fragmentary, and that our ancestors' achievements extend far beyond the conventional record. Each stone, in the quiet vastness of the Giza Plateau, the Great Pyramid and its companions rise like frozen echoes of time. Yet time itself in this landscape was never a simple linear measurement. It was a living, observable phenomenon, etched into stone, sky, and shadow. To understand the pyramids as merely tombs is to overlook the possibility that they were also instruments of cosmic recording, water clocks of monumental scale, and calendars carved into the very bedrock of human history. The ancients, it seems, understood not only the cyclical motion of the heavens but also the subtle ways these movements could be translated into the rhythms of daily life, ritual, and the measurement of ages. The precise orientation of the Great Pyramid, aligned almost perfectly with true north, has long fascinated scholars. Modern measurements place the deviation at a mere fraction of a degree, an accuracy that remains astonishing even today. To achieve this without telescopes or modern instruments requires not only patience but an intimate understanding of celestial mechanics. By tracking circumpolar stars, those that never dip below the horizon, ancient observers could determine true north with a level of precision that belies the assumed technological limitations of early Egypt. Some researchers suggest that by observing the slow rotation of the North Star around the celestial pole, pyramid builders could maintain alignment within arc minutes, a feat requiring generations of careful observation, precise recording, and perhaps even a conceptual framework akin to modern astronomical mathematics. The pyramid's orientations, however, were not limited to the cardinal points. The Orion correlation theory, first proposed by Robert Bauval, draws attention to the alignment of the three main Giza pyramids with the belt stars of Orion. Here the passage of time becomes encoded in stone. As the Earth rotates and orbits the Sun, the position of Orion shifts relative to the horizon, following a slow, predictable cycle. Around 10,500 BCE, Bauval suggests, the pyramid's layout reflected the stars' positions with remarkable fidelity, implying a conscious effort to capture a celestial moment in architectural form. The alignment is not merely symbolic. It is, in effect, a record, a cosmic timestamp preserved for millennia. Precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, adds a further layer of complexity. Every approximately 26,000 years, the orientation of the celestial pole changes, subtly shifting the apparent positions of stars over generations. An observer attuned to these shifts could, theoretically, use star alignments to track long periods of time, far beyond the human lifespan, embedding astronomical knowledge into the very fabric of monumental structures. In this sense, the pyramids themselves become water clocks of immense duration, marking the passage of ages rather than hours, centuries rather than days. One might imagine the builders, guided by cosmic awareness, calculating and adjusting, following the celestial ballet with meticulous care. But it was not only the heavens that informed their temporal understanding. Water, rivers, and the Nile's annual floods were themselves timekeepers, intimately linked to celestial cycles. The rising of the Nile corresponded to particular heliacal risings of stars, most notably Sirius, whose annual appearance heralded the inundation. Ancient Egyptians understood that celestial rhythms were mirrored in terrestrial phenomena, creating a complex interplay between earth and sky. The pyramids, with their internal passageways and chambers, might have served as instruments to capture both dimensions, the measured movement of shadows and the alignment of stones as indicators of solar and stellar cycles, synchronized with the river's rise and fall. One can imagine for a moment the process of constructing a water clock in stone. A chamber aligned to a particular star, where sunlight enters a corridor at a precise angle only once a year, illuminating a carved niche. Perhaps a channel carved into granite would allow water to flow at a regulated rate, marking the passage of hours or days. Each chamber, each corridor, each subtle variation in elevation or orientation, might record celestial events with an accuracy that modern observers still struggle to replicate. Every architectural choice becomes a chronometer, every stone a calibrated gear in a machine designed to measure cosmic time. Beyond the pyramids, other structures hint at similar awareness. Consider the shaft of the Great Pyramid, often referred to as air shafts, leading from internal chambers toward the heavens. While traditional interpretations suggest symbolic or ceremonial purposes, some researchers propose that these shafts functioned as sightlines, allowing observers to track stars with precision, recording their seasonal and precessional movements. The southern shaft of the king's chamber, for instance, aligns with Orion's belt during certain epochs, suggesting intentionality and a profound knowledge of celestial cycles. In this light, the pyramid becomes a massive, permanent instrument, part calendar, part clock, part observatory, and entirely a product of conscious, long-term observation. Even more intriguing is the interplay between water and stone in this system. Ancient Egyptians were master hydraulic engineers, able to manipulate the Nile and its canals, creating reservoirs, sluices, and channels for irrigation. If they could manage such precise flows on a grand scale, it is not unreasonable to imagine that water, in controlled channels within or around monumental structures, could serve as a measure of time. A water clock, or clepsydra, is fundamentally a regulated flow, a steady trickle or rise that marks the passage of hours. Envisioning the pyramid as a colossal clepsydra, coupled with the shadow and star alignments, is to see it as a multidimensional chronometer, recording celestial, terrestrial, and hydrological time simultaneously. This raises the question of intent. Why encode time in stone and water? Beyond practical measurement, there is a spiritual dimension. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, time was not merely a sequence of events. It was cyclical, divine, and intimately connected to cosmic order, or ma'at. Recording stellar positions, monitoring the precession of equinoxes, and linking these observations to water levels could have been part of a ritualized understanding of the universe, an attempt to harmonize human activity with cosmic rhythms. The pyramid becomes both a laboratory and a temple, a place where earthly life intersects with the movements of the heavens. The sophistication of this system suggests not trial and error but knowledge passed across generations, refined and encoded in architectural form. Observing the stars year after year, tracking the Nile's flood cycle, calculating shadow lengths, all this demands meticulous record-keeping, perhaps oral, perhaps in symbolic markings yet undeciphered. Could the pyramid builders have used proto-writing, not systems, or stone markers as mnemonic devices to record observations? Might the internal chambers themselves encode temporal cycles, their dimensions corresponding to fractions of the solar year or lunar month? The interplay between physical construction, celestial alignment, and hydraulic control paints a picture of civilization with a holistic, integrated grasp of time, an understanding that transcends our modern compartmentalization of disciplines. Furthermore, the very survival of these constructions as accurate time markers implies a durability unmatched in modern devices. A clepsydra carved in wood or bronze would decay, a sundial might erode, but a shaft, a chamber, a precisely oriented pyramid can endure for tens of thousands of years, retaining its alignment with the heavens even as precession slowly shifts the celestial poles. The ancients, in stone, were crafting instruments that outlasted generations, perhaps even intended to communicate temporal knowledge to far future observers who might, like us, ponder their purpose and marvel at their precision. Indeed, when viewed through this lens, the Giza Plateau can be read as a record of cosmic awareness. The pyramids are not merely commemorative. They are functional, encoding knowledge of planetary cycles, stellar precession, and hydrological rhythms. The alignment with Orion, the orientation to true north, the positioning relative to the Nile, and the potential use of internal water channels form a multidimensional calendar, an observatory, and a timekeeping device simultaneously. These are water clocks of cosmic proportions, bridging human effort with celestial motion, bridging temporal scales from the annual flood to precessional cycles spanning thousands of years. This vision invites us to reconsider the scale of human understanding in the ancient world. If the pyramids record time in such sophisticated ways, then the builders were not simply laborers or artisans. They were astronomers, engineers, hydrologists, and cosmologists. They engaged with time not as a fleeting human measure but as an enduring phenomenon, encoded in stone and water, designed to survive generations, climate change, and the slow march of millennia. To walk among these stones is to step into a space where human consciousness intersects with cosmic rhythm. One can imagine the builders, perhaps seated on limestone blocks under the cooling evening sky, observing the first stars of Orion's belt, noting the shadows of shafts and calculating flows of water channels, aware that every act is an act of recording, every alignment a chronicle of the heavens. They were writing time itself into the landscape, and their legacy endures, a testament to the universality of human curiosity, the drive to understand, and the desire to connect earthly existence with the rhythm of the cosmos. The Great Pyramid as a water clock, as a cosmic observatory, as a record of celestial cycles, reshapes our understanding of its purpose. It is neither merely a tomb nor a monument to a single pharaoh. It is a stone-bound ledger of time, water, and sky, a reflection of a civilization attuned to the rhythms of the universe. In the interplay of shadows, shafts, and celestial alignments, we glimpse a consciousness that measured the ages, not in fleeting days, but in cycles of stars, in the rise and fall of rivers, and in the enduring flow of knowledge from generation to generation. Imagine standing on the Giza plateau, the wind brushing against the colossal stones, the Nile stretching into the distance, a lifeline snaking through the land. It is easy to picture this timeless tableau and assume the landscape has always been as it appears now, arid, static, defined by the iconic pyramids and the Sphinx. But the truth is far more dynamic. The world of the last ice age was dramatically different. The seas were lower, coastlines stretched farther, and the cradle of early civilization looked very different from the desolate deserts that greet the modern eye. When the last glacial period ended, the rising seas reshaped the planet, submerging countless coastal settlements, ceremonial sites, and monumental structures. The pyramids, perched safely on their elevated plateau, may be among the rare survivors of a civilization that once thrived along now lost shores. During the last glacial maximum, approximately 20,000 years ago, sea levels were more than 100 meters lower than they are today. Vast tracts of continental shelf were exposed, fertile land stretched well beyond the modern coast, and early human populations had access to environments now entirely submerged. For Egypt, this meant that the Nile's delta, today a sprawling labyrinth of water channels and sediment, extended much farther into the Mediterranean, creating a rich network of rivers, lakes, and wetlands. Prehistoric communities established villages, cultivated crops, and possibly erected monumental structures along this fertile coastline, far closer to the sea than any current settlement. These sites, abundant in resources and highly strategic, would have been prime locations for early human activity. Yet, as the glaciers melted and the oceans rose, these settlements were gradually swallowed, buried under layers of sand, silt, and rising waters, leaving the Giza Plateau as one of the few elevated refuges from the encroaching seas. Archaeologists and geologists have long noted that submerged landscapes likely hold a wealth of human history, hidden beneath sediments and water. Off the coasts of the Mediterranean, sonar scans and submersible investigations have revealed ancient river channels, stone alignments, and even evidence of dwellings now hundreds of meters below sea level. Such discoveries suggest that early coastal civilizations may have been far more sophisticated than previously assumed, with trade networks, ceremonial spaces, and possibly even proto-urban planning. For Egypt, this implies that the Nile Delta, rather than being a barren floodplain in prehistory, may have hosted settlements and monumental structures that rivaled or predated the surviving pyramids in ambition. The implications of sea level rise extend beyond geography. They influence our understanding of human memory and cultural continuity. As coastal settlements were inundated, their populations would have been forced to relocate inland, bringing with them knowledge, ritual practices, and architectural techniques. The Giza Plateau, safely above the reach of the rising Mediterranean, may have served as a sanctuary for such displaced populations. It is not inconceivable that the early pyramids were constructed on this high ground precisely because it was safe from inundation, a visible, enduring marker amid a world transformed by water. The plateau's survival may thus be less a matter of chance than a deliberate choice, an understanding of topography and risk encoded in the placement of monumental architecture. Submerged sites worldwide provide instructive parallels. In the Black Sea, evidence suggests that the sea flooded rapidly around 7,600 years ago, submerging prehistoric settlements and altering human migration patterns. Off the coast of Japan, remnants of Jomon period villages lie underwater, indicating complex prehistoric communities adapted to shifting coastlines. Similarly, Doggerland, the now submerged area of the North Sea, was home to Mesolithic populations who cultivated, hunted, and built along fertile coastal plains that vanished beneath the rising tide. These cases collectively demonstrate that rising seas are not merely natural phenomena but active agents in reshaping the human record, erasing entire chapters of prehistory while concentrating surviving monuments on high ground. In Egypt, the submergence of the Nile Delta has profound implications for interpreting the pyramid's context. The plateau's elevation above ancient floodplains would have made it a natural choice for monumental construction. The idea that Giza's structures are survivors of a once larger, now lost network gains traction when considering the delta's extensive prehistoric occupation. Settlements, ceremonial spaces, and possibly even precursor structures may lie beneath meters of sediment, invisible yet integral to the narrative of Egypt's early development. These lost sites, if uncovered, could radically alter our understanding of the pyramid's origins, revealing them as part of a broader cultural landscape rather than isolated marvels. The process of inundation itself likely had cultural consequences. Communities witnessing the gradual encroachment of the sea would have been acutely aware of the fragility of human endeavors against natural forces. Ritual, mythology, and architectural choices may have been shaped by the awareness of rising waters. Could the pyramids, rising like islands above the delta, also symbolize permanence in a world increasingly defined by impermanence? The careful alignment of structures, their monumental scale, and the selection of elevated sites may all reflect an understanding of environmental change, a response to the disappearing lands that once supported life along the Nile. Geomorphological studies support this scenario. Sediment cores taken from the Nile Delta indicate layers of deposition consistent with post-glacial flooding, suggesting that prehistoric landscapes were slowly drowned over centuries. The delta's subsurface reveals ancient riverbeds, estuaries, and even shallow lakes, all of which would have been prime locations for settlement. Any stone structures built in these regions, constructed before the waters rose, may now be preserved beneath layers of sediment, frozen in time but hidden from view. These submerged edifices, if ever explored, could illuminate early architectural techniques, water management systems, and ceremonial practices, providing missing links between prehistoric communities and the monuments that survive on high ground. The rising seas also create challenges for conventional archaeological chronology. Many assumptions about the timing and development of early Egyptian civilization are based on extant sites, largely concentrated along the modern Nile and Plateau regions. If significant populations and constructions were lost to inundation, then the surviving record may underrepresent the sophistication and extent of earlier cultures. The pyramids, in this view, may appear as isolated achievements when in reality, they could be the culmination of a long tradition of coastal settlement, engineering, and ritual practice, whose foundations lie now beneath the waves. Furthermore, the delta's loss may explain gaps in material evidence. Archaeologists have long puzzled over the lack of certain artifacts, inscriptions, and settlement patterns that should accompany monumental construction. The possibility that much of this evidence lies underwater provides a compelling solution. Sites buried beneath thick layers of silt and sand are preserved from erosion but invisible without targeted exploration, echoing the paradox of permanence and obscurity that defines the pyramids themselves. The stones that survive atop the Giza plateau may thus represent not only the ingenuity of their builders but also the selective preservation imposed by rising seas. The metaphorical implications are equally profound. Humanity's earliest efforts to understand its environment, to build, to ritualize, and to mark time, are subject to forces far beyond human control. Water, both sustaining and destructive, erases and preserves, shaping the narrative of civilization as much as human choice does. The pyramids, by surviving above the delta, become symbols of resilience, markers of continuity in a landscape largely reclaimed by the sea. They are reminders that even as the environment changes, knowledge and intention can endure, carved into stone, elevated above the ebbing waters. One can imagine the panorama of lost settlements, hidden beneath modern waters, villages along prehistoric river channels, ceremonial enclosures with precise alignments, and stone structures predating the known pyramids, all submerged, silent witnesses to human ingenuity. The Giza Plateau, by contrast, remains visible, a rare vantage point from which the ingenuity of early Egypt can still be observed and studied. It stands as a testament not merely to architectural skill but to the fortuitous survival of a civilization that had to adapt to a changing world. In contemplating Deserted by the Sea, we recognize that the story of the pyramids is inseparable from the dynamic relationship between humans and their environment. Rising seas shaped settlement patterns, dictated the location of monumental architecture, and erased vast tracts of prehistoric culture. The pyramid's endurance is both a consequence of geological fortune and a reflection of strategic foresight. Their high placement ensured survival, preserving a record that might otherwise have been lost beneath the waves. Ultimately, Giza is both survivor and signal. It signals the ingenuity, observation, and ambition of humans who thrived in a world far different from our own. It survives as a physical testament to choices made in response to environmental change, a high, enduring voice above the delta's drowned memories. And beneath the modern Mediterranean, beneath the sediment and silt, lie the echoes of lost civilizations, silent but potent reminders that much of humanity's earliest achievements may still be waiting, submerged, to tell their stories to those who seek them. The world as we know it today, with sprawling civilizations and meticulously documented histories, gives the impression that human knowledge and culture have grown in a steady, linear progression. Yet the archaeological and geological record suggests a far more turbulent past, one in which the ebb and flow of climate shaped the fate of entire civilizations. One of the most consequential events in this prehistoric narrative is the Younger Dryas, a sudden and extreme return to near-glacial conditions that began roughly 12,900 years ago. In its wake, landscapes were altered, ecosystems disrupted, and human societies forced to adapt, or perish. But beyond survival, the Younger Dryas may have wrought an even more profound consequence: the systematic erasure of accumulated knowledge. Structures, technologies, and cultural practices that required meticulous coordination could have collapsed under the stress of this abrupt climate reversal, leaving behind only fragments and ruins for future generations to ponder. To understand the potential impact of the Younger Dryas on early monumental civilizations, one must first grasp the magnitude and abruptness of the event. Geological evidence, ranging from ice cores in Greenland to sediment layers in North America and Europe, demonstrates that global temperatures plummeted by several degrees Celsius within decades, perhaps even less. Winters extended, growing seasons shortened, and freshwater sources, vital for both humans and livestock, fluctuated dramatically. In the Nile Valley, in the Levant, and across the Sahara, these changes would have had cascading effects. Rivers swelled or dwindled unpredictably, grasslands transformed into deserts, and formerly fertile areas became inhospitable. Communities that had mastered agriculture, engineered monumental structures, and maintained intricate social hierarchies suddenly found themselves confronting a world that no longer conformed to their expectations. Imagine, for a moment, a complex civilization flourishing along the Nile or the shores of the Mediterranean around 13,000 years ago. Large stone structures rise along the landscape, aligned with celestial bodies and etched with knowledge encoded in geometry and architecture. Water management systems, possibly canals, reservoirs, or aqueducts, sustain agriculture and feed growing populations. Knowledge of quarrying, stone cutting, and architectural alignment is meticulously preserved across generations. In such a society, continuity and cumulative learning are essential. A sudden climatic upheaval, violent storms, unexpected droughts, or abrupt changes in river flow, would have imperiled not only life and sustenance but the very social and technological frameworks that supported monumental construction. It is in this context that the concept of a great forgetting gains relevance. While survival may have been prioritized, the intricate knowledge required to sustain advanced construction projects, sophisticated ceremonial systems, and coordinated labor could have been irrevocably lost. Communities displaced by flooding or famine would scatter, and the specialists, stonemasons, architects, astronomers, ritual leaders, may have perished or been forced to abandon their crafts. Oral traditions, the primary medium of knowledge transmission at the time, are especially vulnerable in such crises. Within a generation, specialized skills could vanish, leaving later populations with only fragments or imperfect imitations of what once existed. In effect, the younger Dryas may have acted as a cognitive bottleneck, a filter that preserved only what could survive in highly adaptable forms while eliminating the complex, labor-intensive, and context-dependent knowledge required for monumental culture. The hypothesis that early civilizations could have been disrupted or erased by climate events is reinforced by global patterns. In North America, the Clovis culture, known for its distinctive fluted spear points, appears to have largely vanished around the onset of the Younger Dryas, only to be replaced by more regionally varied cultures. Similarly, in Europe, sites associated with advanced Mesolithic settlements show abrupt abandonment or significant reduction in scale during this period. In the Middle East and North Africa, environmental evidence suggests widespread desiccation, forcing migrations and fundamentally altering settlement patterns. The correspondence between abrupt climate shifts and breaks in material culture lends credence to the notion that knowledge, too, could have been catastrophically fragmented or lost. One of the most striking implications of this great forgetting is the apparent discontinuity between potential pre-Younger Dryas achievements and post-event societies. Structures such as Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, constructed roughly 11,600 years ago, suggest that humans possessed both organizational capacity and technological sophistication far earlier than conventional models of civilization predict. Its monumental stone pillars, carved with animals and abstract symbols, predate agriculture in the region, yet their construction implies coordinated labor, planning, and symbolic reasoning. If similar monumental knowledge had existed elsewhere, along the Nile, in the Sahara, or across other now submerged coastal plains, it may have been erased or diminished by the Younger Dryas, leaving a stark contrast between the earlier achievements hinted at in scattered artifacts and the apparent simplicity of subsequent settlements. The challenge of reconstructing such lost knowledge is compounded by the selective preservation of monuments. Large stone structures, especially those built on elevated terrain, are more likely to survive environmental disruption than wooden or earth-based constructions. This may explain why the pyramids of Giza, perched above the Nile floodplain, endure as icons of human ingenuity, while countless other potential sites remain hidden or destroyed. The Great Forgetting is therefore not only a historical event but also a curatorial one. What we see today is shaped by both the whims of survival and the catastrophes of climate. The narrative we inherit is filtered, presenting a skewed perspective of human development where gaps appear, and continuity is artificially punctuated. Considering the Younger Dryas in the context of knowledge transmission also illuminates the fragility of social institutions. Maintaining monumental architecture requires hierarchical coordination, the division of labor and complex logistical systems. In stable climates, such structures can endure through continuous reinforcement and intergenerational expertise. But when environmental shocks disrupt food supply, mobility, and settlement stability, these social structures collapse. Labor forces disperse, specialist skills vanish, and the very social cohesion needed to transmit technical knowledge dissolves. The loss is compounded because early societies had no written record to preserve knowledge independently of human memory. Monumental construction itself becomes both the repository and the casualty of knowledge. The structures survive, but the understanding of their construction, purpose, and function may be lost. The Great Forgetting also invites reflection on cultural memory and myth. As knowledge of construction techniques, ceremonial functions, or astronomical alignments disappeared, it is plausible that only fragments survived in myth, legend, or ritual. Stories of gods, celestial patterns, or great floods may be cultural echoes of events and capabilities that were otherwise forgotten. In this sense, surviving myths and symbols may encode an awareness of earlier knowledge without preserving it explicitly. The pyramids themselves, enigmatic and unannotated, may function as mnemonic devices, their scale and precision evoking the sophistication of a lost era even as the technical and social context has vanished. Geological and archaeological studies provide additional weight to the theory. Ice core samples and lake sediment analyses show that the Younger Dryas involved rapid temperature drops, altered precipitation patterns, and sudden shifts in freshwater availability. In tandem with rising seas following glacial melt, these environmental pressures could fragment communities, destroy agricultural bases, and challenge survival. Evidence from multiple continents suggests synchronous disruptions in human settlement, implying that the Younger Dryas was not a localized perturbation but a planetary stressor capable of erasing or dispersing knowledge across regions. The consequences of such a forgetting are profound when considering subsequent architectural and cultural developments. Post-Younger Dryas societies appear to restart or reimagine monumental construction, often with new orientations, materials, or techniques. This pattern hints at a discontinuity in technical lineage. Knowledge existed, was lost, and later civilizations either rediscovered similar principles or devised alternative solutions. The pyramids, if their precursors date back to pre-Younger Dryas times, could therefore represent both continuity and rediscovery, a culmination of preserved fragments combined with new ingenuity. Ultimately, the Great Forgetting reframes our understanding of human history. It suggests that what we perceive as linear progress may instead be punctuated by cataclysmic resets, with civilizations rising, collapsing, and leaving only tantalizing traces. The Younger Dryas, with its sudden cold, erratic waters and environmental chaos, may have functioned as the ultimate reset button, erasing not only lives but the very scaffolding of knowledge necessary for monumental culture. Stone, despite its endurance, cannot carry the memory of methodology, logistics, and social organization. Only human continuity can do that, and when that continuity is broken, forgetting is inevitable. The consequences of this event are visible not just in archaeology but in the dissonance between the sophistication of surviving monuments and the apparent technological simplicity of contemporary societies. The abruptness of the Younger Dryas may have created gaps in the historical record, producing civilizations that appear disconnected from their own ancestors' capabilities. If the pyramids, Göbekli Tepe, or other, the Sphinx of Giza is perhaps the most enigmatic monument of the ancient world, a colossal figure carved in limestone that has puzzled historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts for centuries. While traditionally attributed to Pharaoh Khafre of the 4th dynasty, some researchers and independent theorists have posited that the Sphinx may predate the reign of Khafre by millennia, and that its iconic visage, the human face atop a lion's body, may have been recarved to resemble the pharaoh, rather than representing the original intent of the sculpture. This theory, often referred to as the recarving hypothesis, invites us to reconsider not only the chronology of the monument but also the very nature of inheritance, symbolism, and cultural continuity in ancient Egypt. To imagine the Sphinx in its earliest form is to picture a different Egypt altogether. The Giza Plateau may have hosted monumental projects long before the 4th dynasty pharaohs consolidated power, with the Nile Valley already a locus of advanced engineering, ceremonial practice, and symbolic expression. In this context, the Sphinx emerges not as a singular royal commission but as the culminating or inherited artifact of a prior civilization's vision. The lion body, with its sweeping muscular form and grounded majesty, may have been carved in homage to celestial, religious, or environmental principles that are now lost to time. It could have served as a guardian of sacred landscapes, a marker of astronomical observation, or even a repository of cultural memory, an expression of knowledge, power, and cosmology long before any pharaoh sought to claim its face. The evidence supporting this theory begins with geological and erosional studies. Notably, geologist Robert Schoch has argued that the patterns of weathering and water erosion on the Sphinx's body indicate exposure to prolonged rainfall, which would date the monument to the end of the last ice age, potentially exceeding 12,000 years ago. This predates the traditionally accepted 4th dynasty timeline by several millennia. If the Sphinx is indeed older, then the face we recognize today may not have been the original sculpture but rather a later modification, a recarving that aligned the monument with the reigning pharaoh's image, ideals, or religious authority. Recarving, in this sense, is both a literal and symbolic act. The lion body would have retained its majesty, strength, and cosmic significance, while the face could be updated to reflect contemporary authority. Pharaohs, seeking legitimacy and continuity with the past, may have engaged in this act of adaptation to reinforce their connection to the monumental and sacred landscape. The practice is not unique to Egypt. Across human history, rulers have reshaped, repurposed, and reinterpreted inherited symbols to suit the exigencies of governance and religious orthodoxy. In recarving the Sphinx, Khafre, or perhaps his advisors and master sculptors, would have been asserting both ownership and continuity, linking their rule to a pre-existing cosmic or cultural legacy. Artistic evidence within the Sphinx's features also supports the recarving hypothesis. Observers note that the proportions of the face seem inconsistent with the body. The head is unusually small relative to the massive, sprawling lion form. Some suggest this mismatch could be a consequence of modification. If the original figure lacked a human visage or had a different facial geometry, resizing or recarving the head would have been necessary to superimpose the features of a pharaoh. Moreover, stylistic comparisons between the Sphinx's face and known depictions of Khafre in statues and reliefs reveal similarities, but these are not definitive proof of original authorship. Instead, they might indicate an intentional alignment between the monument's visage and the pharaoh's iconography, supporting the notion of recarving rather than original creation. Textual evidence, though limited, adds another dimension. While inscriptions explicitly naming Khafre and associating him with the Sphinx exist, they are primarily later additions, often found in the form of stele or other ceremonial markers. The so-called dream stele of Thutmose IV, erected millennia after the presumed construction, provides a narrative in which the young pharaoh is instructed in a dream to restore the Sphinx. The fact that restoration is emphasized suggests both acknowledgement of the monument's antiquity and an awareness that it may have existed prior to Khafre's reign in a form that required repair, reshaping, or symbolic realignment. The implications of recarving extend beyond aesthetics or attribution. They touch upon the very concept of cultural inheritance. If the Sphinx was indeed an inherited monument, the Fourth Dynasty rulers were participating in a continuum of human achievement rather than initiating it. They inherited not only physical stone but also symbolic capital, cosmic alignments, ceremonial function, and accumulated cultural authority. Recarving becomes an act of negotiation with history, a way to assert sovereignty while simultaneously preserving or adapting ancient wisdom embedded in stone. This perspective challenges the official narrative, which attributes monumental achievements solely to the pharaohs, suggesting instead that they were beneficiaries and stewards of a far older tradition. To explore the hypothesis further, one must consider the broader architectural context of the Giza Plateau. The Sphinx sits in proximity to the pyramids, temples, and causeways that define the landscape. If the Sphinx predates these structures, it may have served as a pre-existing anchor around which later construction was oriented. Alignments with celestial bodies, including solstices and possibly Orion's belt, indicate that the monument played a role in a larger astronomical or ceremonial schema. In this sense, Khafre's contemporaneous constructions could be understood as a synthesis, building around an ancient focal point, recarving its face to assert dynastic identity, and integrating inherited sacred geometries into a new framework of state religion and authority. Archaeological patterns elsewhere lend credibility to the recarving model. In regions such as Mesopotamia and Anatolia, monumental structures were often modified by successive generations. Temples, statues, and city walls were repurposed, rebuilt, or inscribed with the imagery of new rulers, while retaining underlying architectural or symbolic continuity. The principle is simple. Culture is cumulative, and monuments serve as both markers and repositories of inherited knowledge. In this light, the Sphinx can be seen not as a singular creation but as a living symbol, evolving over time through the hands of different societies, reflecting the shifting priorities, aesthetics, and religious ideologies of those who inherited it. Furthermore, the recarving theory aligns with geological evidence suggesting that the Sphinx's body predates its face. Water erosion patterns appear most prominently on the torso and lower portions of the monument, consistent with extended exposure to rainfall prior to the Fourth Dynasty. In contrast, the head and facial features show less pronounced weathering, implying they were carved, or at least modified, later. This temporal disjunction supports the notion that the Sphinx was not originally conceived as a pharaonic effigy but rather as an ancient guardian, reinterpreted to suit later dynastic ambitions. The notion of inheritance also has theological and cosmological dimensions. In Egyptian culture, continuity between past and present rulers was crucial. Pharaohs were often depicted as intermediaries between the divine and earthly realms, tasked with maintaining cosmic order, through ritual, construction, and governance. By recarving the Sphinx, the pharaoh could symbolically integrate himself into a lineage of cosmic authority, aligning human kingship with the enduring power of the monument. The act becomes simultaneously political, spiritual, and architectural, reflecting the multifaceted role of monumental art in ancient Egyptian society. Speculative reconstructions further enrich the hypothesis. Visualize the plateau millennia before Khafre, the Sphinx as a majestic lion, gazing toward the rising sun, surrounded by a landscape of seasonal rivers, vegetation, and perhaps even earlier settlements now lost to time. Its massive form, already imbued with symbolic weight, would have dominated the horizon, asserting presence and memory. Later, when Khafre assumed the throne, the decision to recarve its face may have been pragmatic, aligning the monument with contemporary religious iconography while maintaining the original lion's aura of cosmic guardianship. The fusion of old and new becomes a deliberate act of memory, a bridge between eras separated by centuries of cultural evolution. Critics of the recarving theory argue that evidence is circumstantial, citing stylistic continuity with 4th dynasty artistic norms and the lack of definitive inscriptions predating Khafre. However, proponents contend that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, particularly in a region prone to erosion, flooding, and human intervention over millennia. The subtle anomalies in proportions, weathering patterns, and contextual placement suggest that the traditional narrative may oversimplify a far more complex reality. The Sphinx may represent both innovation and inheritance, a palimpsest in stone capturing millennia of human endeavor, adaptation, and reinterpretation. Ultimately, the recarving hypothesis invites us to reconsider the Sphinx not merely as a monument to a single ruler but as a symbol of continuity, resilience, and transformation. It underscores the possibility that ancient Egypt was a custodian of earlier achievements, rather than the singular originator of monumental ingenuity. By acknowledging the potential layers of history embedded within the Sphinx, we can appreciate it not only as an architectural and artistic marvel but also as a testament to the endurance of human ambition across generations, an enduring enigma whose face may have been reshaped to echo the legacy of those who inherited it. The Sphinx in this light is more than a statue. It is a dialogue between past and present, between original vision and dynastic assertion, and between the fleeting reign of kings and the timeless presence of stone. Its recarved visage is both a literal and metaphorical testament to human interaction with history, a reminder that monuments are not static, but living witnesses to the layers of civilization that precede and succeed them. In contemplating the recarved face, we confront the profound interplay between memory, authority, and interpretation, recognizing that what we see today is the result of millennia of custodianship, adaptation, and reverence. There is a silence in the stone, a quiet that stretches longer than millennia. And often that silence is not merely absence, it is enforced. Beneath the heat of the Egyptian sun, amid shifting sand and granite blocks, there exists not only the physical labor of stones, but also the weight of decisions made, of knowledge withheld, of questions deferred. Who decides what is investigated and what is left buried? Who holds the rights to truth beneath Giza's plateaus? Dr. Zahi Hawass is perhaps the most prominent figure when this query is raised. Archaeologist, former Minister of Antiquities, media figure, protector of heritage, and, for many critics, the gatekeeper of Egyptology. His influence is substantial, permitting or denying access, approving or dismissing findings, deciding which excavations proceed and which are postponed, which theories are broadcast and which are muted. In the world of pyramid mysteries, voices alternative to the mainstream often allege that Hawass and Egyptian antiquities authorities have repeatedly refused or delayed exploration of critical areas some believe hold clues that could radically shift our understanding of ancient monuments. Among those contested areas is the famous Gantenbrink door, discovered in 1993 in the northern shaft of the Great Pyramid, Khufu's Pyramid. Rudolf Gantenbrink, using a robot, traveled down the corridor and reached a stone slab door with two small copper handles. Behind that door no one knows what lies. The robot could not open it. Gantenbrink proposed that this door may conceal chambers, inscriptions, components at the heart of the pyramid's design. Despite this, further investigation has been refused or indefinitely delayed. Egyptian authorities, under the oversight of Hawass and others, have been reluctant to permit robots, cameras, or probes behind those copper-handled doors. Some statements suggest technical difficulty, lack of funding, conservation concerns. But critics argue those are convenient excuses masking an unwillingness to disturb accepted narratives. Gatekeeping is the word used by many, delaying access, limiting publication, controlling who can study what. Another highly visible case is the discovery of the Big Void above the Grand Gallery by the Scan Pyramids project in 2017. Using muon tomography, researchers from Japan, France, and Egypt identified a large cavity, roughly 30 meters long and with a cross-section similar to the Grand Gallery, that had never been mapped in modern times. The discovery was published in Nature, a prestigious scientific journal. Yet the reaction from Dr. Hawass was cautious, even dismissive. He insisted the void was not a new discovery, that pyramids are full of voids, and that anomalies do not necessarily mean new chambers. This response disappointed many alternative researchers and members of the public who felt that the discovery opened profound new questions. Instead of open doors, many saw closed gates. Those disappointed voices point out that while the Scan Pyramids team detected the void, access remains denied. There is no public physical excavation, no camera going through, no breakthrough revealing what lies behind the stones. Hawass and other officials have demanded higher standards of proof, slower publication, more careful scientific protocol. On one level, this is sensible. Archaeology must protect heritage, and hasty intervention can damage both stone and reputation. Yet some feel that this insistence is also a shield protecting orthodox interpretation. The standard narrative, pyramids built by Old Kingdom pharaohs with funerary purpose, rests on many assumptions. Alternatives, while speculative, if given proper access and exploration, might test those assumptions. But when access is withheld, data is incomplete, probes are blocked, the debate stagnates. A narrative becomes entrenched not solely by evidence, but by who controls the gates of evidence. Beyond Gantenbrink and the Big Void, there are smaller but symbolically powerful examples. Gantenbrink himself offered to train Egyptian technicians to share robot technology to peer behind the door. That offer was not taken up. The door with copper handles remains sealed, unstudied or minimally studied, and media cycles move on. The deeper mystery remains. Some reports suggest that Hawass has said that there is no crack under the door, meaning no probe or camera can be inserted, which if true would make further exploration very difficult technically. Critics counter that the thickness and sealing of the door may be a preservation method, but also may have been specifically designed to block access and maintain mystery. The interplay of authority, nationalism, media, and heritage management means that narratives are often tightly controlled. Hawass has been quoted as saying that projects must be scientific and cannot be driven by sensational claims, by alien theories, or by public attention. In the case of the void discovery, he emphasized that the public presentation must avoid exaggeration, that hypotheses must be confirmed, that rumors spread too quickly. Some of this is prudent. Archaeology has been distorted by sensationalism. But some worry that scientific caution sometimes becomes scientific silence, delayed publication, redaction, restricted access, or worse, dismissal. Critics also raise questions about transparency. Raw data from scanned pyramids, for example, has not been fully released to all researchers. At the same time, Dr. Hawass has defenders among Egyptologists. They point out that conservation demands extreme caution. The pyramids are fragile. Grains of limestone can be loosened. Vibrations from robotic probes can destabilize centuries-old joints. Permissions must control for risk. They say that some claims are based on sensational interpretations of radar or scanning data, which may be prone to error. They argue that methodology must be rigorous, reproducible, peer-reviewed. The role of an authority figure is not only to protect stone from damage, but to protect discipline from misinterpretation, hoaxes, and loss of cultural heritage through hasty meddling. Still, the tension remains, between protection and suppression, between caution and curiosity, between what is known and what is hidden. And as with many power structures, the line between legitimate guardianship and gatekeeping can be thin. The question echoing through the chambers of the pyramids is not only what lies behind the stones, but who decides what we are allowed to know? Imagine the Sphinx at dusk. The long shadows of evening fall across its body. A robot arm inserted into the shaft with copper handles, probing. Fingers of light shining on newly opened walls. Instead, silence. Permission denied. The door sealed. Media skeptical. The public curious but unanswered. The scientist waiting for approval. The bureaucrat reviewing permits. The ministry investigating claims. Time passes. The pyramid remains. The mystery deepens. In mainstream publications like Nature or in statements by Scanned Pyramids, the discovery of the void is framed with acknowledged uncertainty. What is the void exactly? Is it a single chamber? Multiple spaces? Was it intentional or the result of construction anomalies? These are open questions. But some alternative theorists believe that the lack of willingness to physically access the new void is deliberate, to avoid findings that might contradict or complicate the orthodox timeline. They suggest that certain authorities may be protecting a narrative of dynastic Egypt, pharaohs, funerary tradition, and everything that comes with institutional control, tourism, national identity. Tourism and national identity are not trivial concerns. The pyramids are emblematic of Egypt's heritage, its global brand, its economy. Revising their origins significantly could impact narratives taught in schools, monuments' perceived sanctity, national pride. The state has incentive to manage how history is told. Those incentives can align with restricting access, dismissing alternative theories as fringe, or controlling what data is shared. In some cases, restrictions are justified by legitimate concerns, damage, conservation, insecure funding. But critics see patterns. Repeated resistance when the subject is challenging, not just incremental, but almost aggressively protective of the status quo. Another pattern: started investigations that are never completed. Promised explorations or robot missions postponed. Requests for filming or detailed reports denied or curtailed. Data from international teams withheld, or subject to review by local antiquities authorities. Publication delayed. These procedural obstacles can be subtle but effective. Someone may write a paper on a cavity found by radar, but without permission it cannot be excavated. Another may propose camera access behind sealed doors, but be told conservation issues or lack of funds. The effect: knowledge stays partial, possibilities remain hypothetical, truths unfinished. In some interviews, Hawass has dismissed some sensational claims outright: accusations of aliens, fake discoveries, media hype without peer review. Some dismissed this as protecting science from pseudoscience. Others believe some dismissals are knee-jerk responses to preserve orthodoxy. When the void was discovered by muon detectors, instead of embracing curiosity, some statements downplayed its significance or claimed the discovery was not new. Sometimes, anomalies are reframed as known construction gaps, restoration additions, or temperature differentials in stone, practical explanations. These rebuttals are not necessarily wrong. Indeed, many are valid. But critics suggest that they are part of a pattern that resists unsettling findings. Scientific debate requires openness. Hypotheses must be tested, claims debated, data shared. When alternative theories are prevented from testing, or when areas of investigation remain sealed or ambiguous, the narrative is impoverished. Voices silenced are not just those who claim fringe theories, they are those who ask questions about chronology, origin, purpose, alignment, and about what lies behind sealed shafts and unexamined. As you imagine the chambers, the sealed doors, the void above the grand gallery, consider each moment when a door remains unopened, when a shaft is not probed, when data is withheld, the possibility of another story fades. Yet possibilities endure in speculation, in debates, in dreams. For some, the pyramids are symbols of the past we choose to know. For others, they are reminders of the past we have not yet earned the right to fully investigate. The voices silenced under Giza are many. Scientists wanting access, alternative theorists urging permission, local communities who believe there are still hidden stories, and even the monuments themselves. The stone is patient, but the silence is heavy. What history remains unspoken under the weight of protocol, authority, and control? May curiosity find its way. May sealed doors crack. May voids become chambers. May raw data be shared. May permissions be granted, so that those who come later may see not only the stones we have left them, but the full echoes of human wonder, not only what has been approved but what was possible. And as you lie in silence, picture the Sphinx in moonlight, sealed doors behind its body, unknown voids waiting above the grand gallery, corridors built before we knew their full purpose, their secrets not yet revealed. The voice that asks, "What if?" echoes beneath the stone, persistent and unyielding, proof that perhaps the greatest mystery is not what the pyramids contain, but who is allowed to explore them, and who remains excluded from speaking truth beneath ancient stone. There is a burden in inheritance. To inherit is not simply to receive. It is to adapt, to reshape, sometimes to obscure. The monuments at Giza, the pyramids, the Sphinx, the aligned shafts, they stand not only as the achievements of dynastic Egypt, but perhaps as relics repurposed, remodeled, and rebranded by later rulers. If the pyramids are something inherited rather than purely invented, then our understanding of Egyptian civilization shifts. The pharaohs did not just build, they inherited. They patched and polished, sculpted new faces, recast meanings, and in so doing hid, or at least softened, the edges of the older, deeper tradition upon which they stood. Imagine an earlier civilization, one far older than the dynasties recorded in hieroglyphs, whose knowledge of astronomy, architecture, geometry, stone cutting, and monumental planning was already mature. They built, aligned, positioned, designed for endurance. Their works were subtle yet immense, knowledge encoded in orientation, in the structure of chambers, in alignment with stars and water. But over time, as dynastic rulers rose, conquered memory, declared legitimacy, they encountered these works. And instead of entirely erasing them, they chose to adapt, fit their own face to the structure, reshape parts, restore what had eroded, and claim a lineage with something far older. Pharaohs, in effect, inherited. We see evidence, subtle yet persistent, of this inheritance in the architectural evolution of early Egyptian monuments. The pre-dynastic period reveals gradual emergence of tombs, enclosures, mastabas, small stone structures. Mastabas, flat bench-like burial structures, preceded step pyramids. They were ancestors in form and concept. According to architectural history, mastabas formed a foundation, both literally and conceptually, for later pyramid building. The step pyramid of Djoser, designed by Imhotep, was a radical leap, but it did not come from nowhere. It built upon forms of mastaba, stacking levels one atop another, enlarging scale, formalizing the enclosure, adding ceremonial walls. In that way, Djoser and his successors were inheritors. They appropriated, refined, amplified what came before. But what if what came before was much older than Djoser, much older than the predynastic known record? What if there was an architectural and symbolic tradition already well established, whose traces we scarcely recognize, but whose influence persists in the design, alignment, and durable engineering of Giza? Pharaoh Sneferu, father of Khufu, provides another clue. In his reign, pyramids evolved from step to smooth-sided forms. The Mitam pyramid, the bent pyramid, and the red pyramid show refinement of engineering, correction of design, as in the bent pyramid's change of slope, and experimentation. These are not mere innovations. They appear as iterations upon existing knowledge. They assume competence in geometry, stonework, alignment. If those skills were inherited, passed down, then the innovations are less invention and more refinement. Consider too the smaller step pyramids and symbolic edifices scattered through Upper and Lower Egypt. Some built in provincial centers, Elephantine, Edfu, Hierakonpolis, Abydos, and Fayum, are small versions, sometimes with no internal burial chambers, but displaying pyramid-like form. These symbolic pyramids or proto-pyramids, many of them modestly scaled and less documented, suggest that the idea of monumental form was already part of cultural imagination outside the central power. Their existence implies that the architectural vocabulary, the language of shape, alignment, orientation, was already in use, widely shared, or inherited across regions. The notion of the pyramids as inherited things becomes more compelling when the anomalies are considered. If, as alternative theories suggest, parts of Giza, as in the Sphinx face, were recarved, if erosion patterns suggest much older exposure, if alignment with celestial phenomena or precession points to epochs much earlier than dynastic times, then the pyramids reflect both what was built earlier and what was reworked later. Pharaohs may have added casing stones, ramps, monuments around, temples for rituals, inscriptions, and modifications that assert their own identity. This layering is inheritance in action. The pharaoh does not begin from a blank slate but from a foundation already present in stone and orientation. Architectural studies also show that the orientation of Giza's major pyramids is unusually precise. Survey studies like Aaron Nell and Clive Ruggles, 2006, find deviations of only about 0.5 arc minutes in the alignment of north-south axes between Khufu's and Khafre's pyramids. Their east-west axes align very closely to true cardinal points. This high level of precision implies a long tradition of astronomical observation and surveying, preserved perhaps across generations. That skill could have been inherited, transferred, refined. Now, if we entertain the idea that the original monumental architecture that pharaohs inherited stretched back beyond the earliest dynasties, perhaps to the end of the Ice Age, then the pyramid's scale and sophistication become less surprising. What seems like a pinnacle might instead be a restoration. What seems like innovation might be redirection or embellishment. The pharaoh's role becomes that of curator as much as creator, preserving parts of what they found, adding inscriptions, temples, obelisks, casing stones, finishing edges, restoring eroded portions, adjusting faces like the sphinxes, constructing causeways, and defining mortuary complexes around inherited cores. This doesn't deny their engineering brilliance. It simply places it in a different light. When one inherits a foundation laid in centuries or millennia past, you stand on it. You polish it, add to it, reshape its edges, but the foundation's form and orientation persist. The inherited design continues to influence what is possible and what is valued. The skill to align structures astronomically, to cut stone precisely, to plan complex corridors and chambers and to survive environmental decay, these are traits that likely developed slowly over generations and survived partly because later rulers had reasons to preserve them. Also, inheritance may explain certain puzzling differences. Why Giza's pyramids are far more precise, massive and perfect than many later pyramids. Why the casing stones of early pyramids were polished so finely, then many later pyramids were rougher or less perfect. If the inherited tradition and technique decayed over time, if some knowledge was lost or corrupted, then what remains in the highest, most resilient monuments will show the clearest remnant of the original inherited system. Yet even as pharaohs inherited, they reshaped narrative. They built funerary temples, introduced hieroglyphic inscriptions, assert their divine status, and embed religious stories, myths, and rituals, overlaying inherited stone with royal identity. The transformation is both physical and mythic. Stones bear faces, walls bear names, temples wrap the mountains of rock in religious symbolism. These additions may have overshadowed or obscured earlier purpose or origin. The inherited becomes the appropriated. The original meaning may fade under layers of ritual, theology, politics. Science allows us glimpses into what might have come earlier. Geological erosion, precession alignments, weathering patterns, comparisons with other ancient sites. These all suggest possibilities that lie outside the orthodox histories. But because much of the record is buried, submerged, or eroded, much of inheritance must be inferred. The gaps are large, the evidence is incomplete. The greater the time that separates us from origins, the fainter the echo. But the echo remains, in stone orientation, in geometry, in anomalous weathering, in uninscribed chambers. Science still debates whether these inherited structures existed, whether dynastic Egypt remodeled but did not entirely build from scratch, whether certain monuments are restorations rather than original creations. Scholars remain divided. Evidence is suggestive: recurrent architectural templates, reuse of materials, stylistic echoes. But proof of specific inherited monumental complexes preceding dynastic times remains tentative. The theory of inheritance requires that a complex tradition existed earlier, that it transmitted knowledge across environmental disruption, societal collapse, or loss of written record. And those are large ifs, though they may align with geological and climatic evidence of ancient capabilities. In your mind, visualize this inheritance as a layering of stone, myth, and human effort. The original builders, now lost to time, aligned stones with seasons, skies, water, shaped their monuments to endure rain, precession, flood. Then the pharaohs came, centuries or millennia later, found these massive, mysterious works, adapted them, added inscriptions, built temples around them, recarved faces, claimed them as their own. They donated name cards, graphics, myths. They painted, adorned, ritualized. But beneath, in core masonry, alignments, structure, orientation, the older tradition persists. The pyramids are not just monuments of young dynasties, but palimpsests of inheritance, seen in reused stones, continued orientation to celestial bodies, and gradual decline in finishes as inherited precision perhaps eroded. Pharaohs, while creators, also conservators, appropriators. Inheritance both preserved and concealed. Let your mind drift to the plateau in pre-dynastic dawn. Imagine structures already there, aligned, oriented, weathered. Clouds overhead, stars shifting, rain falls. Then dynastic rulers appear. They erect temples, carve inscriptions. They give names, faces. They clasp the inherited architecture into state religion. They polish the edges. They place obelisks. They build causeways. They restore faces. But the foundation remains rough, ancient, older than the named kings. The idea that civilization builds anew from scratch is comforting. The pyramids are survivors. Stones perched high on the Giza plateau, weathering time, climate, language, dynasties, and still they stand. They are not merely monuments. They are memorials to deep history, to epochs older than most textbooks dare record. They bear witness to a civilization, or civilizations, that stretched beyond what we think we know. And tonight, we let our minds drift beneath the sand, into the long shadows of time, to contemplate the pyramids as survivors of Earth's own deep history. Long before pharaohs claimed titles, before hieroglyphs adorned temple walls, before the fresco and the scroll, the land was shaped by forces grander and slower than kings. Glaciers retreating, seas rising, climates shifting, human minds turning raw stone into intention. In that swirl of change, some expressions of human endeavor survived. The pyramids are among them. They have endured climate, language, and entire human populations, remnants poised above what once may have been floods, deserts, forests, rivers, all transformed, lost, reclaimed by nature. Picture the environment at the close of the last ice age. Sea levels were over 100 meters lower than today in many places. The Mediterranean's coastline stretched far into what is now submerged land. The Nile Delta was smaller. Land beyond the delta was wide and fertile. Many prehistoric coastal settlements, now erased, once stood, built perhaps with wood, bricks, mud, but also perhaps with stone. Over time, these settlements lay buried beneath rising seas, sediment, shifting deltas. Monuments, if built nearer water's edge, were drowned, forgotten. But the Giza Plateau, elevated, stable, above flood risk, remained. It survived when much around it was lost. The elevation itself, geological fortuity, granted longevity. The idea of civilization beneath the sand is literal and metaphorical. Literally, many early settlements and possibly monuments are now buried by blown sand or submerged by rising seas or cloaked by the Nile's changing course. Metaphorically, the knowledge, the rites, the arts, the stories of those early people are veiled beneath layers of later cultures, languages, and religious orders. But the stones rise above the veil. They speak. What does it mean to survive? The pyramids have survived the rise and fall of climates. The Egyptian Old Kingdom lost prominence. Kingdoms fractured. Names were forgotten. The sands shifted. But the pyramids, changeless in stone, remained. They survived floods, droughts, invasions, political fragmentation, religious transformations. They survived language, from ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs to Coptic to Arabic. Empires rose and fell, Persian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman, and yet Giza's great stones endured through them all. It is useful to draw from what science can tell us. Geological studies show evidence of shifts in climate. Pollen, isotopes, lake sediments in Egypt document alternating periods of wet and dry, humidities rising and falling over millennia. Droughts, floods, the 4.2 kiloyear aridification event that helped end the Old Kingdom. Many of those events threatened stability, food supply, settlement continuity, river flow. Despite that, some structures were built on more secure ground, places less subject to flooding, less vulnerable to climate oscillation. The Giza Plateau is one such place. Elevated above the delta, set back from the immediate reach of rising seas and shifting sandbanks, stable bedrock under the stones. Because of that, pyramids survived where others did not. Think of all that has vanished. Coastal villages now under the Mediterranean, river valley settlements buried by shifting Nile silt, early temple precincts lost to desert encroachment, knowledge systems that perished when specialized practitioners died or were dispersed. The deeper time of humanity is full of ghost chapters. Lost arts, lost languages, lost forms of knowledge. What remains is partial, selective, fragmentary. The pyramids are survivors of that selection, stones that outlast rain, revolt, and forgetting. In ancient times, monuments served multiple purposes: center of ritual, power symbols, astronomical markers, places of pilgrimage, memorials. The pyramids might originally have been built as memorials for gods or ancestors. Now let your mind journey through epochs. Think of the rain that carved stone, of seasons when water fell upon Giza's environs, of times when the sky was heavy with moisture, of repeated cycles of wet and dry, of star positions shifting subtly due to precession. Think of generations of artisans, builders, ritualists, those whose names are lost, whose tools no longer survive but whose designs persist in stone. Let your breath slow as you imagine the continuing pulse of time under the pyramids, the slow shifting of earth, the slow warming and cooling, the slow ticking of stars, the rise and fall of civilizations. The deep history is not kind to human memory. It tends to erase, to swallow names, to bury tools, to corrode stories. But some monuments, those on stable ground, those built with stone and intention, those aligned with sky and shore, survive. The pyramids are among these. They stand not because kings willed them to endure forever, but because they were built partly on geology, cosmic cycles, human reverence, and perhaps inherited wisdom. Because they rose where climate change, rising seas, shifting delta, flooding, river meanders would not easily reach them. As the seas rose after the last ice age, many early settlements, significant forerunners of civilization, vanished beneath water or were destroyed by shifting coastlines. As the delta expanded, as sediment built up, as river courses changed, many coastal and riverside sites were flooded, submerged, or abandoned. What remains on high ground, on plateau or elevated bedrock is what we see. What is submerged or buried remains invisible unless explored. Sonar, mapping, underwater archaeology. But the memory remains partial. The pyramids are part of what remains visible. We think of the pyramids as monuments to human ambition, and they are, but also monuments to time itself, to endurance, to the capacity of stone, of alignment, of mathematics, of human care, to survive across climate catastrophe, political collapse, language loss. They are physical bookmarks in Earth's ledger. Earth itself writes in layers of rock, sediment, fossil, and indeed human stonework. The pyramids act as bookmarks in that ledger, pointing us to what came before, what may be hidden, and reminding us that our own moment is tiny compared to the durations they span. Remember, languages die. Scripts disappear. Dynasties fall. But stone is harder to erase, or shift slowly. A casing stone might fall off, an inscription might erode, but the core mass, the alignments, the voids, the orientation, the skeleton lasts. The pyramids survive because their foundations are deep, both physical and symbolic, because they were built in places with durable geology, because their architects acted in ways that anticipated endurance, whether implicitly or explicitly. So tonight, as you lie quiet, breathing slowly, let your mind spread out over deep time. Imagine centuries layering over centuries. Imagine seas rising, forests retreating, rivers shifting, languages vanishing. Imagine deserts sanding down edges, storms pounding limestone, wind eroding steps, salt dissolving mortar, but stone enduring. Feel the weight of ages in the block beneath your palm, in the length of a corridor, in the mathematics of an alignment with true north or Orion. The pyramids are survivors. Survivors of climate, of forgetting, of politics, of time. They are Earth's deep history monuments. They hold stories not only of the pharaohs but of unknown ancestors, perhaps of more ancient builders who laid something durable, which later generations inherited, modified, claimed, and restored. Whether every theory of predecessors is correct or not, the stones force us to think in deep time. They insist we consider not only who built them but what they survived. In that place of meditation, let your mind rest. Let the centuries fall away like desert dusk. Let the stones whisper softly to you of times uncounted, of climates changed, of peoples lost and found. Hold in your heart that you are small, and that you share breath with those ancient unknowns. Let the pyramid's silhouette, its edges and chambers and heights, teach patience. Let the star alignments overhead, the sky's slow drift, remind you that time moves beyond our days. You may never know all that was. You may never recover every lost sight beneath sea or sand, but the pyramids remain, as survivors, as monuments not only of ambition but of memory, as reminders that deep history is alive beneath our feet. The earth is breathing. Can you feel it? A slow, deep breath beneath the sand, beneath the sea, beneath all we think we know. It moves not in days or weeks but in epochs. It exhales in glaciers, in monsoons, in tectonic drifts. It inhales through dunes that rise, then fall, through coastlines that stretch outward and then vanish. And we're here for just a blink of it, a flicker in the vastness. Yet somehow we've left behind stories written in stone. Close your eyes now if you haven't already. Let your breath fall into rhythm with something slower, something older. The deep tide of the planet. Inhale gently. Exhale softer still. The pyramids, their silhouette sharp against the desert sky, are not just monuments. They are memory made solid. They are the breath of a forgotten world held in stone. And tonight, we've traced their mystery across time, letting each theory, each unanswered question, become a thread in a much older tapestry. We began long before the pharaohs in a world lost to sand and myth, where rainfall carved patterns not with wind, but with water, waves of erosion, vertical and rounded, written like forgotten fingerprints along the limestone walls of the Sphinx. These were not the marks of a dry desert age but of a wetter, wilder earth. One that we, our species, hardly remember. We followed that rain into the heart of the Sahara, imagining green where there is now only gold. Lakes reflecting stars. Trees leaning toward rivers that have long since dried. The African humid period. A time when life thrived, when the desert wore a different name. What might have been built then, when the climate was kinder and the horizon alive with possibilities. And then we drifted toward the mist, the kind that rises when cool air meets warm sand. We imagined the pyramids not under scorching sun, but shrouded in morning haze. The air thick with the scent of wet soil, crushed leaves, and the slow breath of a living Nile. A world where stone met sky not in conquest, but in communion. Do you remember Orion? We stood beneath the stars, gazing up as ancient astronomers might have done. The belt of the hunter traced in the heavens, mirrored by 3 pyramids rising from the earth. That alignment, a whisper across millennia. A suggestion that perhaps the builders weren't merely thinking of kings and tombs, but of the cosmos itself. That maybe, just maybe, they were setting their story against the stars. And within the stone, what we saw was impossible. Granite, carved with uncanny precision. Cuts too clean, bores too smooth, patterns too symmetrical for copper chisels and wooden mallets. Could something have been lost? A tool, a method, a technology from an earlier time? One that slipped beneath the sands, buried not just by erosion but by forgetting. The Great Pyramid, empty. Silent. No sarcophagus. No name. Just voids and shafts and echoes. Is it a tomb, or something else entirely? A resonant chamber? A beacon? A monument not of death, but of energy and awareness? Each question opened another. And the further we traveled, the less certain the answers became. We walked beyond Egypt. To Göbekli Tepe, carved and buried by hands older than agriculture itself. To Bolivia's Puma Punku, to Lebanon's Baalbek. Stones that defy gravity, logic, and sometimes belief. Each site whispering the same idea. What if civilization didn't begin when we thought it did? What if we are not the first? And then we looked beneath the sea. We imagined lost coastlines now drowned. River deltas hidden beneath sediment. Entire chapters of human story erased by rising tides. And the pyramids elevated, enduring, not because they were built later but because they were built wiser. Then came the cold. The Younger Dryas, an abrupt deep freeze, like a sudden silence. A catastrophe that could fracture a thriving society. The kind of event that could unravel language, structure, science, in a single generation. Leaving only stone behind. Survivors without storytellers. The face of the Sphinx may have changed. Recarved, reimagined, given the features of a later king. But if the body belonged to an earlier lion, then perhaps the dynasties we know were only inheritors of something far older. Not authors but editors. And we pause to wonder, who controls what we remember? We spoke of gatekeepers, of sealed doors, of unknown voids, of unanswered questions that lie behind administrative silence. And we asked gently, honestly, why? Why should truth fear discovery? And now we arrive at the final breath of this journey. The desert is quiet. The wind has softened. The stars are high. We look back not just at the pyramids, but at time itself. What we've explored is more than stone. It is inheritance. It is survival. It is a story written by the earth, read by dreamers, scientists, skeptics, and seekers alike. A story of resilience, not just of structures but of memory, of how something built with intention can outlast storms, dynasties, and forgetfulness. The pyramids are not the peak of a young civilization. They are the lingering breath of an ancient one, perhaps even more than one. They are deep-time architecture, aligned not just with stars but with epochs. They are quiet, they are still, and they are waiting. For whom? For us. For those yet to come? Tonight, as your breath slows, imagine them not as relics of the past, but as participants in a long, ongoing dialogue. Imagine the earth as a sentient canvas, holding memory in stone and sky in silence. Imagine deep roots of knowledge, not linear but cyclical, rising again when the time is right. Perhaps it already is. Take a breath. Feel the weight of 12,000 years settle softly on your chest. Not heavy, not burdensome, just ancient, familiar in a way, like a dream you almost remember. Maybe this is all a story, maybe not. But isn't it beautiful to wonder? The earth is breathing, so are you. Good night, traveler of time. Good night, keeper of questions. Good night, dreamer in the dust. Sleep well. The pyramids will be here in the morning.